Pardon me, microphone.
Well, it looks like everybody is here that's going to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Okay, so Amy's not going to be with us tonight, so if anybody is near Amy or whatever afterwards, if you want to share any notes with her or whatever, feel free to do so. Okay, so a couple things. Last week you guys turned in Journal Article 3 and the integrated lesson. So this is week 7, which means we have one more class after this. And so I wanted to talk about what is due next week. There's a couple things, and I know we talked about it last time, and some of you are a little bit confused on what was asking. So the first thing that's due is the final week-long lesson. It's a planning project. And I'm going to change it a little bit because what the syllabus said that I gave to you guys was, it says for the final assignment, teacher candidates will work like elementary teachers, planning a week's worth of math lessons in small groups of 2 to 4 teacher candidates. I'm going to have you just do that individually. That way you have more time and you don't have to worry about getting with other people and trying to find that time between now and the rest of the class, or between now and the next class, but you also have other classes that you're taking. So what you will do with that week-long lesson is just that. You're going to write a week-long lesson focused on just math activities. So you're going to have basically 4 days of math, whatever standard you want to teach, whatever concept, but you want to feel that. And I'm going to set some parameters. In our district, our students have to have each day I ask my students to do at least an hour of math. So you're going to have a lesson plan that covers 5 days, and during those 5 days, you're going to have 5-hour blocks where you've broken that hour block into whatever you want it to look like. But I want you to have a main, a whole group lesson in there. I want you to have an individual, some individual practice lessons. Some individual practice lessons, and then some group centers that you would incorporate through that week. So yes, it is only for math, 5 days, so it's 5 hours total. So you're going to have a Monday hour, Tuesday hour, Wednesday hour, Thursday hour, Friday hour. Each one of those hours, like I said, I want to see at least 3 things. A whole group lesson, part of that hour. Maybe some guided practice lessons where the students are working certain problems and you're helping them through that process. Some individual practice lessons. Then I also want to see a couple of different math centers that you would use to help reinforce that concept. Any questions on that? Go ahead, David.
You said you want to see 3 of those a day?
Yeah, each one of those days should have at least a whole group lesson. And that whole group lesson, like on Monday, it could be the introduction part of it. And then maybe on Tuesday, the whole group lesson is you're kind of reteaching what you taught Monday, and then you're kind of expanding it a little bit. And Wednesday, you might have another whole group session where you're expanding it a little bit more. And then maybe Thursday, you're doing some type of, maybe Thursday all day is practice or whatever. But I want you to get into those three parts: whole group, guided practice, and then some centers, some individual practice. Okay. And Caitlin, you said at least one, but not all. At least one what?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
It's easier if I just say it. So you're saying at least one of those things that you're requiring, like the at least one like whole group lesson one day, and then the next day guided practice. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or if you could, each day you're probably going to do what my teachers have to do every day is they have to do some type of whole group lesson every day. And like I said, Monday it's usually introducing the concept, and then Tuesday it's kind of okay, this is what we talked about yesterday, here's how we would add to it. So I want to have at least 10 minutes, or well, I'm not going to limit it, but I want to see at least whole group instruction in there, some guided practice, and then some individual practice. And that individual practice can be worksheets, it can be the students doing, math games, you can have math centers. So every day you're going to have a whole group activity, a guided practice where they're practicing something as a class and you're actually watching around monitoring that. And then the rest of the time can be individual practice. It can be math centers. It can be flashcards. It can be whatever it is that you're helping the students understand that concept. Someone last, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying. Okay, that's more clear now. Thank you.
Okay. And Mark talked about one standard. You can do one standard. You can do two standards. It's up to you, Mark. I mean, I just make it so that whatever you choose, you can extend that concept or that standard out for a week's time. This isn't going to be a lesson plan. This isn't going to be like a lesson plan where you're going to say, here's the objective, here's my activities, here's my evaluation. That's going to be kind of incorporated through the whole thing. So you're going to list your standard, and then you're going to have on Monday from da-da to da, this is what we're doing. So because it's going to be a week's worth of lesson plans, at least 5 hours, it's going to be pretty detailed so that I know what you're doing. I don't want you to cover every standard for every activity, but so let's say we're talking about fractions, which is what today's chapter's on. So maybe Monday I'm going to introduce fractions through a whole group class. We're going to introduce fractions. We're going to talk about them. And then I'm going to give them some guided practice where, we're working practice problems showing how to add fractions together. And, maybe, I do that with the whole group for 10 minutes, do some guided, and then maybe my activity on Monday is the kids are creating their own little fraction towers or fraction tubes or fraction sticks, or whatever you want to call them. And then Tuesday, then we say, okay, so we talked about addition of fractions. Here's how we can extend that, and then I'm going to do some practice with them again, and I'm going to do some type of activity where they're practicing it. So it's not going to be like lesson time like you guys have done in the past, but I want to see 5 hours of where you've broken up your math into basically a timeline from 8 o'clock to 8:10. This is what we're doing. This is my whole group lesson. From 8:10 to 8:20, this is the guided practice that we would do, and this is what it would look like. And then from 8:20 to 8:40 is 20 minutes of independent practice where the students are making fraction cubes or they're making fraction towers or whatever. And then the last 20 minutes or whatever, 10 minutes, the students are wrapping it up, and this is going to be their math ticket out the door. So I don't want to say not. It's hard to answer your question, Lydia, because I want it detailed enough where I can follow what your kids are going to do, and I know that, and it's going to gaps. I don't want it enough detail where there's, well, how did you get from here? Where was that connection? So kind of think about what doctors do, and kind of, if I were to do this if they did, then and that's what I would do here. Any questions on that? Is it kind of clear? I hope so, Lydia. I hope you followed. Okay, so any other questions on that? So like I said, 10 hours of nothing but math, 1 hour each day on how you're going to teach whatever standard or math concept it is. Okay? Okay, so now it out. Okay, so okay, made a great lesson plan. I use some pictures as examples to describe things. Okay, yes, that's fine, Christina. That's perfect. Internet. Okay, so content area and click on segment. Arrow at the same time I am. The last few we've done, you've written a general, you've done a number talk. You should have done a number talk already. You've done a great lesson where you use other subjects such as literacy, science, or art. You're doing the final week on that signature assignment done is the in-task reflection and then the portfolio. And a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the in-task reflections. And basically what I asked you guys to do is, as you were doing the number talk, the integrated lesson, the curriculum map, as you were doing those assignments, I kind of asked you to do the in-task reflections, which says will contain a description, analysis of the project or lesson, as with insights for teaching in the future. In your syllabus, up higher up, you have all those standards that it gave, and so all that you did back to those, tie that lesson plan to you'll do the same for the number talk, you'll do the same for the integrated lesson, you'll do the same for the final week-long lesson that you're doing next week. If you do the final week-long lesson, you will pretty much have all of that done if you've been doing the reflections along the way, like we talked about. And then the last thing is the lesson plan portfolio. Okay, so if you go up on your syllabus, I don't have a syllabus there. Let me open that up. Hold on. Okay, so if you go up on this, on page 9, and it starts on page 6. It says your signature, on page 6 it says your signature assignment will be evaluated based on the following rubric. So that's the rubric that you're going to use for your signature assignment. Now if you keep going up, starting on page 2, towards the bottom it says in-task model core teaching standards. Standard 1 is learner development, Standard 2 is learning differences, and Standard 3 is learning environments. And then it talks about the different content standards. And then you have your instructional practice, you have professional responsibility. Those are the in-task standards that it's talking about. So as I'm going down my syllabus now. And so the first thing you did was the lesson plan. It said create a plan to begin the first week of school, including math instruction, which will focus on promoting the growth mindset in math and help students rethink what it means to be smart or good at math. You guys did that already. So I would just take that lesson that you already submitted, go back up and tie it to one of those in-task standards, and just write a little reflection on it. This is why I chose that standard, and this is how I plan to use that lesson plan in the future, because that's all that the in-task is asking you to do. And then you would do the same thing for the differentiation lesson, the the activity that we've done, and all of those on the syllabus are on page 9. So you would do it for the initial plan, the differentiation lesson, the curriculum talk, the number talk, and the integrated lesson. No, you don't have to tie all those in-task standards for each one of those activities. So again, for the initial plan, for the differentiation lesson, the curriculum talk, the number talk, and the week-long lesson. So for those 5 things, you're going to go back up and you're going to pick 5 of those in-task standards, any 5 of those. And you're going to relate that list. You're going to take one of those, the initial, I'm looking at the initial lesson plan. I'm going to go back up and I'm going to choose, I'm just going to pick one. So let's say my initial lesson plan, I'm going to choose under instructional practice, I'm going to choose standard 6 assessment. The teacher understands and uses multiple methods of assessment to engage learners in their own growth, to monitor learner progress, and to give the teachers and learners decision making. So I'm going to say, I chose standard 6 under instructional practice assessment for this reason. This is why I tied it to this lesson, blah, 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 blah. And then, this is how I would use this in the future. It's not going to be a lot. It's not really asking for you. It's kind of asking for you to kind of like we've been doing in the journals. This is my summary of what I did. This is why I did it. This is how I'm going to use it in the future. So get out a piece of paper or something to write with so that you have this written down. So you have to do that for the initial lesson plan. You have to do that for the differentiation lesson. You have to do it for the number talk. You have to do it for the integrated lesson. And then you have to do it for the week-long lesson. So for those 5 things, you have to do that in-task reflection. And see, there's 5 things. Each one of those in-task reflections is worth 10 points. So you're going to get 10 points for reflecting on the initial plan, 10 points for reflecting on the differentiation lesson, 10 points for reflecting on the number talk, 10 points for reflecting on the integrated lesson, and then 10 points for reflecting on the week-long lesson. Okay, any questions on that? And again, I'm going to answer Lydia's question. You pick one of those standards with each one of those. Yes, put them all in just one Word document. So just kind of separate it. So here's lesson plan at the top, whatever you need for lesson plan, then skip a couple of lines, and then do differentiate lesson, put it all there. Number talk, put it all there. Integrated lesson, put it all there. Week-long lesson. Yeah, just put it all in one Word document. Perfect. Yes, put the reflection after each plan. So like I said, mine would say initial plan, and I would have a copy of the plan that I did, and then I would and then right underneath it, I would put in-task reflection, and I would put that reflection on why I chose that reflection. And then I would skip a couple lines, and then I'm going to say differentiation lesson. Here's the lesson that I did. Here's the in-task reflection, and I'm going to skip another number line. So all of the in-task or all of the work. Go ahead, Mark.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, when we go to turn in the in-task reflection, do you want us to, am I understanding you right, that you want us to put a copy of each one of those assignments ahead of it, then an in-task reflection behind it, what we did, in-task reflection behind it, what we did,
Yep.
in-task reflection behind it, putting it all in maybe a 15-page Word document?
If it takes you 15 pages, then it takes you 15 pages.
Right, but I mean, that's what you want, though.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. Your lesson plan, the reflection on it. And like I said, most of that is already done, because you should have a copy of all that stuff that you turned in. So you're just going to copy and paste that part of it into the Word doc, and then all you have to do is the reflection for each part, if you haven't already done that. Michaela asked a good question. What do these reflections do? Technically, they are week 8 assignments, and week 8 assignment starts next Tuesday. So technically, you should have until Sunday night at midnight. But that's what I was going to ask you guys. The in-task, the week-long lesson plan, it's pretty rigorous. Well, it can be rigorous depending on how you're going to break up the time. So what my thinking was, your week-long lesson plan is due next Monday, which is the 4th. And then the in-task reflections and the signature assignment, that is due the following Monday. So we would have our class the 5th. You would have those assignments due Sunday. I would grade them Monday, and then I would have your grade finalized on Tuesday, the 12th. Your last class is next Tuesday the 5th. So I would say the week-long lesson plan, I'm going to have that set for due next Monday, and then the in-task reflections and the signature assignment. Well, the signature assignment is the whole thing. That will be due on Monday the 11th. Or actually Sunday the 10th, and I'll grade them all on Monday since it's our first day of spring break, and then I will have your grades done. Go ahead, David.
Make sure I have this clear. The signature assignment is basically just exactly how Mark explained it, those 15 pages. That's the signature assignment. We don't need to turn the in-task reflection in separately from that. We're just turning them in with the signature. Okay, I just want to make sure I had it there.
The in-task reflection is basically your signature assignment. That is, well, it's part of the signature assignment because if you go down on your lesson, let me see. So if you go back to your lesson plans, to the signature assignment thing, the very last thing says your signature assignment is the lesson plan portfolio. It says teacher candidates will compile their completed lesson plans and in-task reflections into a lesson plan portfolio. Since the lesson plans and in-task reflections will occur throughout the semester, the majority of the assignment will be cut and pasted together. An introduction and a reflection section will be added to the compiled lessons and reflections to complete this assignment. So basically that in-task reflections, that is your signature assignment. That's what you're going to turn in on the 10th of March. That is really your final assignment.
Yep.
Kieran said, are we turning in copies of what we did, or should we be making changes based on grades or comments? That is up to you. Most of the comments that I put in there were just very basic, because what you guys did in the lessons, how you wrote your lessons, were very good. If you got points missed, it was because of how it was written, not what you wrote. It was, like I've talked about, it was the grammar or the misuse of, single nouns with plural verbs or vice versa. That's the whole thing. I don't think there was any assignment that I really told you guys, wow, you really blew that one or whatever. So I would make it easy. Go back and look at my comments, and if I had some that were pretty drastic, then you might want to change. But if not, hey, my job is my thinking is work harder. Work smarter, not harder. If you've already got it and you feel pretty good with the lesson. Now, there was a couple of them that I think I might have made comments that, if you could have added a little bit more detail, I would get those done. I haven't graded what you guys turned in last week because I normally do that on the weekends. And this last Friday, my father-in-law got taken to TMC by ambulance, and we took off in the middle of the night Friday, and we didn't get back. I didn't get back until late Sunday night, and I had to run back yesterday after I got out of work. I had to run back to Tucson to take my wife some stuff. So I didn't get any of last week's grading done, and I know that's not really an excuse because we didn't have class the Tuesday before. I could have done it after I took that student home, but I didn't get it done. But I will have it all done. Today is Tuesday. I'll probably get everything done that was already turned in. I'll try and get that graded tomorrow, so you guys will have everything up to date except for what you guys will turn in this coming Monday. Okay, so David wants me to repeat due dates. So the week-long lesson plan, which is the 5 hours of math, Monday through Friday, that is due next Monday, which is the 4th. Yeah, today is the 26th, so that's due the 4th. And then the signature assignment, which is the reflections and everything we're talking about now, that is due on the 10th of March, on a Sunday. That way I can use all day Monday, and I'll have your grades in first thing, because I think they give me a week after the last class, so I will have those grades in Tuesday for sure. Any other questions on that? Okay, and I don't know who is around Amy, but if you want to share that with Amy, or I can email Amy myself. But if someone works with her closely or knows how to get a hold of her and wants to share it with her, they can. If not, she can, or send her my way or whatever. So the only change that I'm making is the week-long lesson plan. That the way it's written in syllabus, it says it's a group project, but I'm taking that out of it because I don't want to add extra stress. If you guys trying to find days to meet or not meet, you will do that all by yourself. The other thing it says is, I think it talked about doing it in a grade level that is different from your practicum. I don't care about that. I mean, if it's something that your senior practicum teacher do and you want to do that, that's fine. If you want to go out of grade level, that's fine. But when you turn in the week-long lesson plan or project, make sure you have on there. And most of you have done this, but just double checking. Make sure you let me know what grade it is and what standard you're covering. I've been able to find most of those pretty easy, but just making sure. Go ahead, Lydia.
Question. So it says on the syllabus that it's curriculum talk. Is that our curriculum map that we made with a group?
Yeah, that was your curriculum map that you guys already did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mark.
Can't help myself. And I know that this was already asked, but I just want to make sure that it's clarified. So when we go to do the week long, we don't need to do the standard, the activity, the assessment, or do you want that in there?
If that's going to be part of your lesson, like so for instance, you probably won't do any assessment on Monday because on Monday you're probably just introducing the lesson. But on Friday, you might be doing an assessment to see if they've understood what you've done during the week. So that would be part of so you might have an assessment in there on Friday. But I think what you guys are doing is looking at, do I still want it in lesson plan format? I don't. I need to know the standard so I can make sure it's a legitimate math standard. And then through what you're going to do, you're going to cover the objective in your whole group lesson. The activities are going to be covered in either the math games you're doing or the math centers or the guided practice and the individual practice. Kind of all that stuff is going to be in there. You're not just saying, here's my activities, so you know what I mean? So Monday you won't have an assessment unless you're doing some type of informal assessment or like a ticket out the door. But on Friday you probably will have assessment to see, where are we by the end of the week's instruction? What do I know they know? What do I know they don't know? So it's going to depend on the day. Yes. If you did a pretest, just allude to that. Let's say you did the pretest the Friday before. Just say, on Monday's thing, you're going to say, okay, and on Monday, you might start your whole group by saying, okay, Friday we took a pretest, and this is what the pretest told me, so here we go. Here's where we're going from there. Or you can put the pretest down as part of your Monday activity, however you want to do that. Okay, any other questions? Are we as clear as mud on that? Alright, perfect. Okay, and so by the end of the day, I'll probably just do another reminder just to make sure everybody understands the dates and what's due. Okay, so number talk. I want to talk about that real quick. That's something you guys had to do. I haven't read through them. Anybody just want to kind of either chat their experience or kind of talk about the number talk, what they did, how they worded it? What did you get out of it? Because I know one of the things that I did when I took this class way back where I was where you guys are, I didn't have a practicum at the time. We didn't do practicums like you guys do now. So I wasn't in a practicum, I wasn't student teaching. I wasn't substitute teaching. So I had to get some neighbor friends over that lived next to us that I knew I had to get some of my neighbors' kids that I knew were in school, and I had to sit outside on the table so that we could be seen by wherever. And then we just kind of talked about numbers. I started off by finding out what grade they had, asked what kind of math they were doing, and I went from there. So does anyone want to kind of share their number talk experience, how that went, how you started it? Was it helpful? What did you gain from it? I know I can look at grade. I'll get all that information when I grade it, but you guys hearing from other people kind of helps you think of something. Maybe you could have said, "Oh, you know what? I should have asked that," or "I didn't even think of that." Go ahead, David.
So talking to my student was kind of interesting. I talked to a fourth grade student in my practical classroom, and she was the teacher. When I asked the teacher, there was like an interview. It was actually only my first day in the classroom. She's like, yeah, take this student. She's really smart. She's sitting there talking her up and about math. I was like, okay, sweet. And I think the teacher talking her up right before I interviewed her made her really nervous and she didn't seem like she didn't want to disappoint her teacher with her answers. Because right off the bat, she started trying to use really big answers like mathematician and let's see, what was another one that she I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'm trying to read through this really quick. But she started throwing out these huge words, and I was like, whoa, what are you trying to do? So I think her teacher kind of jacked her up a little bit by talking her up. But overall, I think she really knew what she was talking about. I kind of took the questions that you gave us and twisted them a little bit. So like I asked her, to you, how do we use numbers to represent items? And so she gave me this solid answer, but she said, oh, here it is. It helps us do arithmetic and numbers. Numbers are a universal language. That's the answer she gave for that question. I was like, okay. I ended up having to redirect her. Overall, she gave me a good answer, but I was not expecting some of the stuff that she said. She was stumbling on her words a lot. Like, she wasn't anticipating it. She didn't really know what to say because she had never been forced to think about numbers in the way I forced her to think about numbers.
Right.
Well, not forced her, but asked her to think about numbers. And so it was really cool. It was interesting to see how she looked at them and how she realized that, oh, snap, I don't really think about numbers like this. It's kind of just watching her gears turn to try to give me an answer.
Right. And if you think about that, Mark, you asked that question towards the end of the third quarter of school, and she stumbled on it. I mean, and that's one thing about these number talks is we think. I mean, and like she said, the teacher said, "Here's one of my smarter students." So that student's probably doing well, but it's still just on your answers based on what you said. She said, it sounds like there's still a lot of stuff that she doesn't understand or hadn't been asked those questions that certain way. Thanks, David. Anybody else want to share? Or I shouldn't say anyone else. I should say who's next. Go ahead, Aaron.
So I interviewed a second grader in my freshman class, and she has number sense down. That a lot of the questions I asked her, she would say, "Oh, well, you're counting. 3 means you have 3 pencils." And she's beginning to think about base 10. That like 10, for example, is 1 10 and 0 1. She's starting to think about things like that. She's thinking about numbers in a concrete manner. Like you find numbers on a number chart and a calendar. They tell you the date, things like that.
Okay.
So she's really starting to put all these ideas into concrete and maybe eventually move on to some more abstract thinking.
Yeah. And I know who because I saw you the other day, I know who your freshman teacher is. And math is one of her strong sense. She used to be one of my second grade teachers before she went to Roosevelt. And math is one of her strongest sense. One of her students used to always perform well when they used to do when we used to do the Stanford 9 and second grade level. Her class really did really well on math, and she does hammer it quite a bit. But I think a lot of it also is because our district as a whole has made this push with, kindergarten classroom or first grade classroom nowadays without seeing a lot of manipulative on there. So they're doing a lot of hands-on, starting with the concrete and moving to the abstract. So awesome, good job. Anyone else? Who's next? Come on now, don't be shy. Come on, somebody step up. Tell me what else you know, or did you learn something that you maybe didn't know? Michaela, go ahead.
So I actually did the number talk with my little cousin who happens to be at the school where I'm doing my practicum, and he's a second grader. So when I asked him like how he feels about math, he feels that sometimes it can be hard, but it can be fun at the same time. And then I kind of asked him, like, what do numbers and math like represent? And from his perspective, he felt that it could represent someone's age. And then, of course, like the numbers that they use in class. And then he also said barcodes, which I thought was pretty interesting, too, because then he applied it to everyday life.
Right.
And then, so one of the main ways that he knows how to change numbers is by adding and subtracting, which makes sense for his grade level. And then I asked him, like, what are some random places where he can find numbers. And some of the things that he listed were, like, on a paper, a box, a mailbox, toys, and then the walls at the school. And then I asked him some, like, any additional thoughts or things that he can think of with numbers. And some of the things that he listed was multiplying, dividing, and challenging yourself, which I thought was really interesting. It kind of showed a growth mindset for him to say that challenging yourself is something you can do with numbers.
Right. So it also sounds like, just like that other student, it sounds like he has, or he or she has a really good grasp of number sense, and to the point where now they're taking what they do know and they're saying, you know, that barcode is another form of numbers that does this. So good. I like that. Good job. And Christina, you probably didn't do it wrong, Christina. You're just not sure. Maybe you're not sure you asked the right question, but I'll find that out when I grade through it. Okay. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I did mine a little bit differently too, so maybe Christina and Amber were on the same track here. My thing is that I'm in a 6th grade math class, and it's the rotating classes, so she barely has enough time to get her lessons done and get them into starting their homework before they're switching classes again. So what she's been using me for, and I'm actually really enjoying it, although I didn't think I would. I haven't had a lot of board time this semester where I did last semester. I've been more of a in-place tutor. She kind of moves me around to areas that she has students that are either struggling, either because of math-related issues or behavioral issues. I seem to find myself more with the behavioral than I do the math. But recently she's put me with a student that's a transfer in. In fact, I think I made a joke about that our last class, that she came from Dorothy Stinson, but she didn't. She actually came from Morenci, I think. And she doesn't do her homework. I think she's undiagnosed ADHD, my personal opinion, but I sat down and I was going through it, and she's trying to add up these numbers. We were doing mean deviation. And she couldn't remember the rules. Well, I got her the rule sheet, which Julie Cook, my teacher, the teacher that I'm in the practicum with, has these little journal sheets that she gives them every day to glue into a math journal. And so I went and found her the sheet that was related to finding mean and mean deviation. And I sat there and I went through her step by step as she went through it. But as I'm watching her, she's adding up her numbers. I believe there was 5 numbers that she was adding up, double-digit numbers. we were trying to find the mean deviation average of grades in a classroom. So they were all 60s, 70s, 80s, something like that. Anyways, as I'm watching her add, her basic adding skills were just off. I mean, she was jumbling up numbers. It was, I felt like I was watching a bus accident in slow motion, watching her sit there and add up numbers. I mean, it was, I could see passengers as the numbers screaming out the window saying, stop! So I finally sat down again with her and I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go and sit here and how do you add numbers? When you've got large groups of numbers, how do you group them together? And she said, well, I just sit here and I'm watching her. She's counting on her fingers. She would do like 7 plus 1, and then she would, and if the next number was like a 4, then she'd sit there and go 1, 2, 3, 4, and adding that on. So say it was 7 and 8, she'd go 9, 10, 11, 12 on her fingers. And I'm like, this is how you're getting lost because you can't keep your tally. So I said, how about we group the numbers? How about we take your and I pointed out, I asked her, I said, okay, what are these number places called? She says, well, this is the 1s and this is the 10s. So she's got that down. She's not an idiot, and I would assume that she wouldn't be at 6th grade. But I think what happens is she sees this group of numbers and it just scares her so much that she just gets lost. So I said, how about we take these in chunks? So let's take all your 1s places. You have 5 numbers. Let's turn that into 3. So let's bracket out your 7 and your 1, make it 8. Let's take your 4 and your 6 or whatever it was, make that 10, and let's just make this smaller and easier chunks to work with. And so we sat there and we worked on that for a little while. And by the time we were done, I gave her 3 or 4 more problems that were, in the group of her homework that really was like extra credit. And I had her go through those and do them on her own. And it seemed like she had kind of learned something from me. I was kind of feeling kind of good about it, You get that weird feeling how you've kind of reached somebody that was struggling, especially since I've been known to struggle so bad with math. And so by the end of the class, I went back over. I had to get up and go help somebody else. So I went back over, and I'm looking over, and I was just so impressed with how she had now taken it one step beyond that. She was now not just grouping, say 5 numbers into say 3. She was now 5 numbers into 3, 3 numbers into 2, 2 numbers into 1, and I mean she was just slamming it down, and I was like, it's clicking. So I looked at her. I said, "Is this clicking?" And she says, she looks up at me, and she's this cute little girl. It's got, she wears pigtails and braces, so she looks up at me, and she's the biggest smile I've ever seen, the glistening multicolored braces back, and she's like, "Yes, I'm finally getting it. Thank you." And so Mrs. Cook saw her make that comment and that smile at me later, and then I find out it's a competition going on. There was 2 of them that transferred in. She's a twin. The other math teacher has the other twin, and they're struggling with her as well. And so now Mrs. Cook's got this big thing, and I don't know how they did. They had a district test week before last, and I meant to ask her last week because they were going into that district test, and she wanted to see if she could prove using the twins how much better her instruction was over the other teacher. So, but that was my math talk. Now, granted, it's not really like I sat down and asked them if they understood, number sense, if they understood all this. I kind of felt like working with a 6th grader that, trying to maybe fix their loss that they had early instead of trying to make them define it was more what I should be doing. So again, I probably didn't do what I was supposed to be doing. You'll read it and you'll understand where I'm coming from. I'm a little more detailed in that than I just was, but I don't know.
Okay. Anyone else? A couple more. Go ahead, Candice.
Alright, I didn't really have any time to ask any of my students, but I asked my daughter, Liberty, and she's 8 years old in 3rd grade, and I asked her, what does she know about numbers? Her response was that there's a lot of numbers, small numbers, big numbers, and then I asked her, what can you do with numbers? And then she said, you can add, subtract, multiply, fractions, tell time. And then she also said that right now she has difficulty telling time. And then I asked her, what does she like most doing numbers? I asked her adding, subtracting, multiplying. She says she's liking learning multiplication, and she says she likes counting by fives right now because it's easy. And then I went off. I asked her, "What do you like about math?" And she said that asked her if she liked math, and she said it's kind of difficult, especially word problems. And then she said that she was glad she helped me with my work, and now she asked me, can I help her with her work? So that was pretty basic on asking her about math questions.
Hey, and like I said, there was no set parameters for that you guys had to do. All I wanted to do is have conversations around the subject of math. It didn't matter. So those of you who put earlier that you're not sure if you did it right or not, hey, if you had a conversation with someone about something in math, you did it right. And like I said, some of it's an eye-opening, especially like going back to David's example. You know, for that fourth grade student at this time of the year to still be having some of those uncertainties, that would worry me as if I were their teacher and found that out. And Mark, to go back to your comment, but I would make sure that's not happening make sure that you're getting what you need out of that math class instead of just kind of, it sounds like you're doing a little bit of babysitting and tutoring those bad behavior kids, but make sure you're getting what you need to get out of the practical part of it, that you're seeing concepts taught and all that other stuff. Go ahead.
She's she's going to let me do a lesson tomorrow, as a matter of fact. So, but I think a lot of it is, and I got a kick out of when I first got over there. Mr. Molyneux, Hal Molyneux, wanted to see me, and the last practicum he didn't. I mean, he just kind of, not that he didn't make himself unavailable to me, but like he didn't really need to deal with me or talk with me. I did have to talk to him a couple of times last semester just because I asked for permission to do a couple of things that I wanted to do, like sit in for parent-teacher conferences, that kind of a thing, just to get a feel for him.
Right.
But this time, he wanted to see me before my practicum and have a meeting with me, and I thought, well, that's a little odd. I'm like, what did I do wrong last semester was actually what I was concerned about, and what it basically amounted to is that he wanted me to be prepared that my practicum instructor is not known for letting students teach in her classroom. Gotcha. And so he wanted me to be, because he knew that I'd basically been teaching the lessons every day in my practicum, with the exception of the very first day the semester before. But it was a social studies class too. I mean, come on. I mean, I'm sorry, but as much as they rewrite history, you can't really screw up a social studies class. I'm sorry, you really can't. So, he just wanted me to be comfortable with that. And so it's been kind of a joke as I go to sign into my practicum, because I have to sign into the office just like your student teachers do when they come in. I'm coming on campus and I'm going to go back to my classroom kind of thing. And he keeps edging me when I see him and he's in the office. He's like, "Has she let you teach yet? Has she let you teach yet?" It's kind of become kind of a joke. So I was joking with him when I left last Wednesday. I said, "She's gonna let me teach a lesson," and he's like, "Awesome." So I think it's just that she's had some bad experiences in the past, and that's kind of what he keyed in on, that she's had some bad practicum experiences in the past. So she's kind of gun shy. But I also feel that she used to teach the math class that Aaron and I took at the college that Mr. Orr teaches now. The math for teachers, the one that uses Sylvia's book. So, I mean, it's beautiful to sit in there and see those concepts that we were taught in that class used to teach students. I mean, it's one thing to see it in a classroom where you're being taught how you're going to teach. It's another to see them practically used in the classroom. So I'm enjoying that portion of it. but she's a very high-tech teacher. She's got the little pad thing she carries around with her that's keyed into the projector. It's got the little, the little Apple Pencil thing that you use to do stuff, and they're using Go Math, so it's all online. So I think that's been some of it too. I don't know that she's real comfortable with me utilizing that or using the board. So to make a short comment, a long one, I think I'm learning a lot from her, and I really think that the time that she has me tutoring the students is actually helping me a lot too, because it's helping me to see how the confusion can happen, and how maybe I can do something a little bit different when I get out there to maybe kill some of that confusion. I'm also seeing, and I don't want this to, please don't let this ever, anybody that's listening right now, don't let this get back to Mrs. Cook, because I'm getting a good rapport with her. But she doesn't understand the concept of wait time. She's and I know that she's under the gun to get a lesson in there in a short period of time, 3 classes a day, an hour and 40 some minutes per class. Plus, she has to do her the study hall, and then the group activity stuff that she does. But she doesn't hang long enough for the students that are in the middle or in the bottom for them to get the answer. She takes all of the answers from the top side students that have already worked ahead as she's teaching the lesson, and so a lot of students are falling behind because of that. So they end up in my category where I'm sitting there working with them after the fact. And they'll look at me and they'll go, she just moves too fast, I can't get to it. And I'll show them my paper where I was following along, and I'm just as far behind as they were. And so I said, don't, it happens. I understand what she's trying to do. The homework will explain it, so don't panic, because that's what's making you fail right now, is you're panicking. I know I've set where you're at right now. I had the same problem. This is just something that you're just going to have to pay attention. If you can't write and pay attention at the same time, then honestly, I'd rather, if it was me, I would rather you pay attention. Because if you're writing and losing attention, you're not going to get the concept, and you get home, do the homework, and be lost. So, and so that seems to have actually helped a couple of the students, because they've caught me in the hallway and said that, that's helping them. So I feel like I'm getting a lot out of it. If the very minimum, I'm losing my gun shyness about math. So anyway, sorry I took over your class. Sorry.
No, Mark, one thing you said, though, is, and that's exactly what I did. When I taught math the last 4 years at the middle school, the teacher next to me was very much like you're saying. She knew where she needed to be at the end of the quarter, and she pushed her students. And I started having students from her class come into me either in between classes or at lunch, or some even before school and some even after school, because she was going so fast that they were getting lost, and they just needed me to reteach the concepts that she taught, but at a slower pace so they were able to understand it. I don't even know, and we were side by side, so I'm sure she had to have seen, but she wasn't always out that much. But like I said, I had a lot of her students coming to me going, I understand what she's doing, but she's just going so fast that I'm getting lost. And a lot of times it was just me making sure that they had all the steps, that they didn't miss any of the steps that she had covered. Because once they knew the steps, then they could do the work, but they needed to make sure they had all the steps. And of course, she was an older teacher. She knew her stuff. She was a great math teacher. But because of that, the students knew that she pushed them because of where they needed to be for the testing. They were always, a lot of them were very reluctant to raise their hand and ask for her to repeat. So I understand exactly what you're saying. And there's some good comments that have been posted as the conversation's going by. I was just going to say, I agree with Kieran. I agree with Christina. I'm loving it. But that hang time, I felt that when I've stood in front of the class myself in the previous semester, because you have to force yourself to do the count of 5 in your head, and it's really hard to do that, but you have to. It can't be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No. I mean, it's literally it's like you're singing a song. I have a specific song I sing in my head. I'm not going to share it with anybody, but it's a 5-second
type of song that when you sing it, it runs it out right. But we had.
And like I said, guys, if you can't do that, then when you ask a question, make sure you have different places in your class, and as you ask a question, walk to another place and make sure that that place is pretty far across from where you are, just so that you're taking the time, and then and tell the students, by the time I get across the room, you have that much time to think about it, and walk at a leisurely pace or whatever. But there's a lot of things that you can do. Wait time is one of those things that, as a new teacher, you're going to ask a question, and you're going to think you've waited forever, and you're going to find out that it hasn't even been 2 seconds. I have a lady right now that she's a long-term sub, and I walked in and I was watching her for a little bit, and afterwards she came in and she was, okay, so I saw you in there, what did I do wrong? I said, well, you tell me. We kind of reflect back on the little bit of time that I was in there. What were you doing? And she kind of went over it. And she said, so what do I need to improve on? I says, you tell me. And I made her think a little bit, and then so then I said, you tell me what you did wrong. And I waited. And she kind of was, blubbered, kind of thought about what she was doing. And then she stopped, and I still hadn't said anything. And I said, that's what you were doing wrong. And she goes, I don't get it. I says, how long did I wait before I even talked back to you again? I says, that's the one thing you're not doing, is you're not giving the students wait time. But I waited a long time. I says, no. I said, I timed you. I said, from the time you asked a question until the time you called on someone to answer, or until you gave the answer yourself, I said, no longer than 3 seconds. I said 3 seconds. By 3 seconds, I says, your lower end kids, your special ed kids, they haven't even begun to process it. They're still trying to make meaning of what you said, and the words that came out of your mouth, before they can even think about, okay, now I understood what she asked, now I've got to think about the answer. So it'll come with practice, and like I said, I've seen everything. Like Mark said, he sings a song. I have teachers telling me they've sing songs. They move from one place to place. They count. It's like they say, when you brush your teeth, as you're brushing your teeth, you should sing "Happy Birthday" to yourself twice. That's how long it should take you to brush your teeth. As long as you're not a auctioneer, you can. It's quite a bit of time. And the other thing you got to make sure you don't do is say, Candace, what is the answer to da-da-da-da? Because by me calling Candace at the beginning, everyone else stopped thinking. Or the other side of that is, who can tell me the decimal equivalent of pi? Aaron. Again, no wait time. By calling on Aaron, everybody just shut off. So ask a question, and I even tell my teacher, do that as part of your procedures. Say, thanks, Aaron. Do that as part of your procedures and say, I'm going to ask you a question, and you have from the time I go from here to here, where I'm going to give you, a certain time to think about it, and then I'm going to call someone. So don't raise your hand. I'll call on you. And some people do it opposite. Some people raise their hand and they call on the kids that don't raise their hand. There's all kinds of ways to do it. Someone, two more people to share, please. Because this is a pretty good discussion. I think you guys are getting a lot from it. Sticks in a jar work as long as you make sure you. I have a teacher that I've watched her. She's a 4th grade teacher, and as she asks a question, she sticks her finger in between the sticks, and she swirls the stick slowly 4 times before she draws a stick. And then she puts it outside, and then she asks another question, and again she stirs the sticks 4 times, and then she answers. So she has a routine, and again, I think if I time it, I think it gives the kids about 7 seconds of wait time before she calls someone. What my practicum teacher does is tell students they're going to have maniacally to think of a second answer if that's appropriate for the question. Okay. Yeah, so those are probably the kids that get it right away. As a matter of fact, Erin, and don't tell her this, but your practicum teacher, when she was one of my teachers, I evaluated her, and we have what's called the classic T, which means the T, the top part of the capital T, is the front of the class where you're teaching, that whole walkway. So, like, I'm going to use the teacher's class that's right across from me. Her Promethean board is on the south wall. So from the door to the wall, that's the top of her T. And then the middle T is right down the middle of the class. So Erin, your practicum teacher, when she was on my campus, she did the practical, the basic T. That's the only way she walked in the class. And because I was evaluating her, she called on the same 3 or 4 students. So when I asked her during the evaluation, I asked her about it, and she says, "Well, I got a little nervous because you were in there, and I knew I was giving them a lot of wait time, but I didn't want to give them too much wait time. So I started calling on the students that I know the answers so that we can make sure we got everything covered while you were in there." And I said, "Oh, so you're blaming me for you rushing through the lesson?" And she kind of joked about it. I says, in doing that, and I understand your whole rationale, and I understand you got to get from point A to point B, but you got to really think about, am I giving all the students the same opportunity to participate in the discussion, to ask the questions, to answer the questions? And so, I didn't mark it down for it, but I just brought it up in our discussion so that she would think about it. And she did say, normally I do. She says, normally I call on randomly, I'll call on people that don't have their hands up, or I'll call on people that do have their hands up. But she was, you know us, we always get nervous when we know we're being evaluated, and we want to make sure that we're not spending too much time on this and not enough time on that. So, like I said, it didn't hurt her in any way, shape, or form. It's just a conversation we had. Go ahead, Mark.
What I found too in this practicum watching is that the students have gotten used to this lack of wait time, so they're acting, they almost act like, well, there's no way I'm going to get a chance to get to that answer, so I'm just not even going to try. And so, that creates that issue too, is when they don't try, then they start dropping other things as well, which is what I was finding with their homework stuff. It's like, well, it doesn't matter because such and such always has the answer, and it doesn't matter because such and such always has the answer. Or, then you run into...
Right, it doesn't matter because you won't call me anyway.
Right, exactly. And I heard that a couple of times from resource students, and I'm like, yeah, that's an issue. So,
Right.
And so I'm like, I guess I get it because I think that there's just too much stress put on, and I think math teachers are probably the worst. There's too much stress put on them to get from point A to point B and not drop any steps in the middle, that sometimes they think of the students as more of a mechanical than an actual human being. That they just need to get through this process. It's like, okay, I wash my clothes and I dry my clothes, and it takes 30 minutes or 40 minutes to wash my clothes. It takes 40 minutes to dry my clothes. That means I have to have it all done in 80 minutes. So if somewhere in the interim, I forget to put soap in, well, it's not going to get washed because it's going to take a whole other step, and I don't have time for that. So, and I think that that's sometimes what happens. People get too rushed. That's why I think I enjoyed the social studies the most, because with those non-tested standards, if she got the lesson done, she got the lesson done. If she didn't get the lesson done, she didn't get the lesson done. But she always brought math, and she always brought science. She always brought literacy into her class. So she wasn't just teaching social studies, she was teaching other things too. So, anyways.
Right. Okay, anyone else? Sorry, Amber, that's supposed to be Amber, not Amber. My keyboard's raised up, so it's hard for me to hit all my buttons. Sorry. Anyone else? 2 more people that'd like to share before we move on.
I guess I'll go.
So, David.
Okay. So I had 2nd grade, and they were working on an assignment, but it was like a money worksheet. So I kind of thought that was a good opportunity to talk about, I guess it wasn't necessarily just numbers in general, but it has to do with numbers. So I talked to them about money and, like what they would spend their money on, and it was also a good chance to see what their number sense was in relation to money. Because some students still think like, well, maybe 100 cents is a lot of money, but really, it's not. So, so I thought that was a good opportunity to kind of talk to them about numbers in relation to money. And it was a good review because we actually I had manipulatives like the fake coins, and so and some of them just like. They're 2nd grade, but some of them couldn't remember like what a dime how much a dime is worth. So I think it was good to just use that as a review, but also as a little number talk.
Right.
Yes. So yeah.
And you feel, as second graders, do you feel like they had a pretty good sense of the coins in their amount?
After I kind of refreshed them, yes, they did. Some of them just kind of get it right away, and then others just need to go over like what they represent.
Right.
And
right.
what their names are.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
And see, and part of that is like my grandson is 6, so he's in first grade. And my first grade and my fourth grade did a performance last Tuesday, which I told you guys about. And part of the fourth grade, they did a song about money. And afterwards, I asked my grandson, what he liked about it. And he said he liked the money things. And he goes, "But Poppy," he goes, "there's already things I knew." He goes, "I know you can buy more with a quarter than you can with a dime." And I said, "Well, how do you know that?" And his rationale was because the quarter's bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So the bigger, the more you buy. So I showed him a penny and a dime, and I said, "So which one can you buy more with?" And he said, "Well, the penny, because it was bigger." And so I had to count, size isn't all the thing. I says, now, in the first one, the quarter and dime, yeah, you're right, because the quarter is bigger, but that's not why you can buy more things with it. And that kind of is going to go into what we're doing on the first page of fractions when we get there. So, yeah. And again, Caitlin, there was no right or wrong answer. You took what they were doing in math, and you, at that time, and you just kind of talked about it. That's all I wanted out of this assignment. One more person. Come on, who's it going to be? One more person. Once. Oh, didn't work because located leave. No one else? No one else? Giving a lot of wait time. A lot of wait time. Christina, go ahead.
Okay, so I originally started to do the number talk the way everyone else kind of did it, as like an interview with my first grader, and then I thought that I was doing it wrong, so I changed it. But with my son who's in first grade, I asked him what numbers were for, and he's like, for counting things, which he's not a math fan. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like, can you find any numbers in the house? And he's like, yeah, and he named like the basic places, like with the actual number symbols. So we have a wall in our living room that is like full of picture frames. So I'm like, do you see any numbers on the picture frame wall? And he said, no. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, is there any type of numbers you can see up there? And he's like, he started looking for actual number signs, and he didn't realize that he could have counted the picture frames, or there's some picture frames that were brown that he could have counted, and then there were some that were white he could have counted. So that's kind of where I started to go with the conversation with him before I thought I was doing it wrong. So but I mean, he's in first grade, so he's still
right.
And
a lot of the thing with first graders though is they're very literal. You ask him to look for a number, he knows what a number looks like because that's what he's been taught in class. He hasn't been able to take it, like someone said earlier, where they're taking it to the next level and saying, oh, like you said. Now, if you would have said, what are some math patterns, he probably could have told you, hey, well, 4 of those are brown and 5 of them are black or whatever. It's just his experience where he's at now. So again, there's nothing. Neither one of those is right. Neither one of those is wrong. Awesome. So hopefully you guys have these number talks in your classes. It looks like, as I was reading through the chats, a lot of your teachers do a number talk, and it's maybe not the way we do a number talk, but the teacher is having the students talk about a number. Amber says, that they write the number on the board, or they write their answer on the board, and then if someone else gives the same answer, they put a check by it. So they're still getting everybody's feedback, but they're saving time from having to write what someone else says every time. I was in a second grade class the other day, and the teacher was doing a little survey on chocolate and who likes chocolate and who. It was actually a writing lesson, but the way she was writing the answers on the board, she would just kind of put them wherever they said, wherever there was room. She wrote the answer down, and I could see one little girl she wrote the third thing choice down. I see this one little girl, her leg kind of started shaking. And every time the teacher wrote another word on there, it just like, you could tell, like, I don't know, maybe she's going to have extreme OCD or whatever, but it was driving her crazy. So finally, after the teacher had put up on everybody's chocolate, she asked the teacher, she says, "Can I go to the board and do something?" And she goes, "Sure." And she went up there, and she had all kinds of circles drawn and this and that. And what she did is she sees things in patterns. So she put like all the candy bars, because basically the students were either answering what their favorite candy bar. They listed it by name. We had some people that their favorite, because the question was, what is your favorite chocolate and why? So a lot of people listed their favorite candy bar. A lot of people listed chocolate ice cream, or chocolate pudding, or chocolate cake. There was two people that said they didn't like chocolate at all. That to them it tastes like dirt. And then there was another one that put their favorite chocolate was white chocolate. And that person, like I said, she took those and she had to group them into 5. And she used 5 different markers to group them, because that's how she saw it. That's how she sees math. It was just kind of interesting, because I asked the teacher afterwards, I says, does she normally do that, or was that a first time thing? And she says, no. She says, anytime I write something on the board and I don't put it in an organized way, she has to go up and organize it, because that's how she sees it. So I don't know if she was one that was taught math in kindergarten or first grade, that she was taught to find similar patterns or similar groups or similar commonalities between whatever she's working on, and then start from there. It was just kind of interesting to see how that panned out. Like I said, and it was a writing assignment that this girl had turned into a math grouping patterns, because that's how she sees things. Just kind of interesting. Okay, so last week we were supposed to cover chapters 11 and 12, which is understanding fractions and fraction computation and decimals. And as I was looking through this stuff, I thought, this book is pretty good. It gives you guys a lot of examples. It gives you guys a lot of teaching tips. It gives you a lot of teaching tools. But you're not going to learn how to teach math without me asking specific questions. So what I did today is I kind of asked specific questions. But I want to start on page 278. If you guys would turn to page 278. And I want you to specifically look at the 4 shapes at the bottom of page 278. And I'm going to start off with a very basic question. And my question is, in each one of those shapes, how many pieces are shaded and how many pieces are shaded and how many pieces are not shaded in those 4 shapes? Okay, so the 4 people that answered so far, again, hence the wait time, all came up with the same thing. 3 of them are shaded, 1 is not. So are you telling me that, so basically what you're saying is 3/4 of each of those objects is shaded, correct? 5278, Caitlin. And Aaron, you need to stop getting in my head and going to the next question, because my next question was going to be, so if you had a choice of getting 3/4, if each one of those was a different kind of candy, which one would you want and why? Would you want the upper left, the upper right, the bottom left, or the bottom right? And why? If they're a candy, which one do you want? Mark, why do you want the upper left, Mark? Christina's challenging you, Mark, on the upper left. She wants the bottom right. Go ahead, Mark.
I may have misheard you. Did you say which one would I want the 3/4 of, or which one would I want the quarter of?
Which one would you want the 3/4 of?
Oh no, I want the bottom right. I agree.
Why do you want the bottom right?
Because the bottom right is actually going to gain you more volume for your 3/4, if that's what you're calling it, is 3/4. Because it's not 3/4. It's not an equal 3/4.
Right.
That's more like
Well,
that's more like a 7/8.
Right, but see, that's what I'm getting at, is for students, this is another reason fractions are difficult for students, because most students are going to see each one of those as 3/4. But and you guys, because of your age and experience, you can see that those aren't four equal shapes. But the students, if I ask the question the way I asked, which was of the shapes listed, how many are shaded and how many are not shaded, all the students were going to say 3 of the 4 are shaded. They're going to want the upper right because to them it looks like it's bigger. Each one of those individual pieces is bigger, so I'm going to have more of the candy than I am if I get the triangle, or if I get the bottom right, or even if I get the circle. So the way fractions are drawn themselves can be confusing for students, because actually, except for, well, they're all 3/4. 3/4 of each one of those objects is shaded. You guys are smart enough to realize that the objects aren't divided equally, but I didn't ask that. I didn't ask, are they divided equally? I said, how many pieces are shaded and how many pieces are not? So again, just that's one thing with fractions, because kids see the fractions in different shapes, and some of them, your concrete learners, have trouble realizing that 3/4 is 3/4. Would you want 3/4 of, a giant Hershey's bar, or would you want 3/4 of the little individual bite-sized Hershey? Which one do you want? 3/4 is 3/4. I'm still getting 3 of the 4 pieces, but the size comes into matter. So the question I wrote down for you guys is, if today was your first day that you come across your curriculum guide and it says, today we are starting our unit on fractions. The question I wrote down is, how would you begin a study about fractions? How would you start? What would be your introduction of fractions to your students? Okay, Aaron, explain. You were the first to respond. You put pizza. How would you use pizza to start introducing fractions to the students?
Well, they're already familiar with pizza, so we'll say you cut a pizza in 12 pieces. So you start, very basic. You take a slice, you have 1/12 of the pie, and you can maybe address the discrepancies in size. You have a smaller pizza and say, oh, well, a fourth of this large pizza is more than a fourth of the small pizza, even though it's still a fork.
Right.
Just make it concrete as possible.
Okay. And you're right, because the students already know about pizza. That's probably the most important, the most familiar fraction that they see. David, thinking pie, same thing. Christina says I wouldn't even say the words fraction. I would start listing out different size candy bars and discussing it before even getting technical with it. Okay, so you're gonna kind of start off from the abstract and go to the concrete, maybe. Just a side note, and I wrote this down as soon as I read this when I asked this question. A while back on Facebook, for those of you that watch Facebook, there was a thing with it, and I think they're an English couple or they're an Australian couple because they have a real cute accent. But he's telling her, he says, if we go buy pizza, and I buy 2 pizzas, and one is cut into 12 pieces and one is cut into 15 pieces, which pizza are you going to eat? And or which one did you choose? And she said she would choose the 12 pieces. And he says, well, why wouldn't you choose the 15? She goes, because I can't eat a whole 15 pieces of pizza, but I can eat a whole 12 pieces of pizza. And his whole point of it was, whether it's cut into 4 pieces or 12 pieces or 15 pieces or 16 pieces, it's the same size of pizza. But she was getting caught up on the denominator, on how many individual pieces were there, not realizing that it's the same exact pizza, just cut 2 different ways. And I mean, when I first saw it, I loved it. I laughed because I told my wife, that's how people are. They get focused on one part of it, and they don't see the whole picture of it. So how would you? So you have some people said. Christina said she would start bringing out different candy bars and having to go from there. Aaron said he would start with pizza, start with pie. So would you guys even use the word fractions? I know Christina said she would, but would you guys even use the word fraction in the first couple of lessons, or no? Okay. Again, it's going to depend on the age, right? It's going to depend on the age of the student. It's going to depend on what they know, what you've covered beforehand. On page 278, the next thing I wrote down, it says, how would you begin a study about fractions? On page 278, it gives you 5 things. It says there are many reasons why fractions are difficult to understand. So it says fraction symbolism is very different from whole number symbolism. Fractional notation involves 2 numbers separated by a horizontal line, which represent one quantity. For children who understand whole numbers and place value, fractional notation at first makes no sense. The other thing you find is, I was taught that with fractions, you could write the fractions with a slanted line. A 1 slant 2 instead of 1 horizontal 2. They both mean the same thing, but when you're actually going through the algorithms of, add the tops or whatever the algorithm is, that slanted line throws you off. So I have really had to force myself to write it with a horizontal line because I was brought up writing it with a slanted line. Number 2, which is kind of we already talked about, it says it's difficult to compare the size of fractions. After children learn to count meaningfully, they can compare whole numbers easily using a number line. However, as illustrated in the opening story of this chapter, comparing fractions such as 2/5 and 5/8 requires an understanding of complex models. So again, and usually what happens is fraction gets introduced in 1st grade, it gets introduced in 2nd grade. 1st grade, it's more dividing things in halves, maybe 4ths at the most, but that's about it. Yeah. Number 3, the rules for operations with fractions are different from the rules for operations with whole numbers. Children mistakenly use the rules for whole numbers with fractions. For example, a child might mistakenly write 1/3 plus 2/5 equals 3/8, because with whole numbers you just add the 2 numbers straight across and you put the answer. So students think, okay, if I do that in whole numbers, well, I do the same for fraction. So 1/3 plus 2/5 equals 3/8, because 1 plus 2 is 3 and 3 plus 5 is 8. Number 4 says there are more rules for operations with fractions than for operations with whole numbers, and the rules appear contradictory. In the previous example, when adding fractions, it is incorrect to add both the numerators and denominators. However, when multiplying fractions, it is correct to multiply the numerators and denominators. For example, 1/3 times 2/5 is 2/15. And then number 5, children mistakenly believe that parts do not have to be equal. That kind of depends on the teacher. Most students will think that things are always divided equally. Because if you think about it, when the kids get snacks in class, the teacher makes sure they all pretty much have the same amount A lot of the problems in the math book say, Johnny has 4 friends and Johnny has 20 pieces of gum. He wants to make sure each one of his friends gets an equal amount of gum. So a lot of times the way we start teaching stuff, it uses one word, and then later on we find out, well, fractions don't have to be equal. The next thing I wrote down is on page 279. You have, it says, there are 4 meanings of fractions. Most of us are familiar with the part and whole meaning, but the other meanings are important to learn as well. So we always have the part and whole, the top number. I've heard it described as the part number is how many parts. The bottom number is how many. The bottom number is the whole piece, or how many total pieces there are. And then the top number is the part. What part of those total pieces? Christina says if you added 3 slices out of 6 pieces to one slice out of 6 pieces, it visually makes way more sense than trying to teach actual adding fractions first, I think. Yeah. So having students manipulate things without, perfect. So you have part and whole, you have measure, which is usually is number line. Quotient, that says a fraction can represent the division of 2 numbers. If 3 cookies are divided equally among 4 people, this can be written as 3 divided by 4, with each person getting 3/4 of the cookie. And then you have ratio. A ratio can compare 2 sets of measurements. This interpretation of fractions is different from the 3 others because it does not include partitioning. Quick story on that. I don't know if I already shared this with you or not. If I did, please bear with me. But I told you guys a while back I had a teacher. I've only had 2 teachers that have actually called me in to say, hey, I want you to come watch what I'm doing because my students aren't getting it. And so I watched her, but then later on, she had a sub. And she knew she was going to be gone, and she said, hey, I know I have a sub, but my students have really been struggling with ratios. And I was having trouble with them. The way I was teaching it, or with me teaching it, they were still having trouble learning. Can you, even though the sub will be there, can you go in and teach ratios to my students? Because I know you have a math background. So I went in there and I asked the kids, okay, so what did we do yesterday? And she said, we're talking about ratios. I said, okay, so how many of you understand what ratios are? And like 4 or 5 of them raised their hand. And I said, okay, so 4 out of 24 do not understand what ratios are. Oh, and then I said 4 out of 24, 4 out of 24. What are some ways I could rank that? And then one person went and they wrote exactly what I wrote down, 4 out of 24. I said, okay, so what's another way we could write that? One person said 4 over 24. And then another person did the 4 colon 24. So they understood how you write a ratio, but they didn't actually understand what a ratio was. And so I played it and I said, okay, stop. Close your books. Put your books aside. Okay, so girls go on this side, boys go on this side. So they became my manipulatives. I said, okay, so right now, what is the ratio of girls to boys? And they're like, huh? What do you mean? I said, what's the ratio of girls to boys? What does that mean? I said, okay, so you just showed me one way I can write a ratio as a fraction. Okay, so someone count the number of girls. So I think there was 12 girls in the class. So they put the number 12 on top. I said, okay, so someone count the number of boys in the class. And I think there was 10 boys. So they put 10 on the bottom. I said, okay, so our ratio of boys to girls is 12 to 10. We have 12 girls to 10 boys. That's a ratio. I said, so what's now, if that's the ratio of girls to boys, what's the ratio of girls to the class? And so I just kind of switched it up a little bit, and then they had to think, okay, 12 girls, but there's 10 boys, but he didn't ask boys, he asked to the class, so the ratio of girls to the class would be 12 to 22. And so then I had them just moving around. I said, okay, so if you have long sleeves, go over there. If you have short sleeves, come over here. Okay, what's the ratio of long sleeves to short sleeves? And I just kept using them and moving them around, and they finally realized that, oh, ratio is just comparing two groups. They don't have to be equal, but I'm comparing 2 groups. I'm comparing this group to this group. So the kids actually became the ratio, and then the next day the teacher comes in and she goes, I hate you. And I said, what did I do? I says, I did what you asked me to do. And she goes, yeah, but you did it where the kids understood it. I went in today thinking I'm going to have to redo this, this, and this, and now my whole plan is gone because I went in with a whole reteaching model, and because you taught it the way you taught it, I don't have to reteach. I said, okay, so you should be thanking me, not mad at me because I saved you a day, and I move on. So it's just kind of how you do things and how you explain it. A lot of people won't teach ratios with manipulatives. They'll teach it as fractions and writing fractions a different way. Another thing I was going to tell you guys earlier when we were having our number talk is I was sitting in a parent-teacher conference the other day, and so it was dad and mom, but it was stepmom. So it was dad and stepmom on this side. The boy was in the middle, and then mom and little sister was on this side. And mom and dad don't get along. It was that's why the teacher had me there in case it went ugly. But the girl, and I think she's a 4th grader, maybe a 3rd grader. She goes to Lake Nelson. So I noticed that she was practicing some math problems during the conversation. So I was watching her and listening at the same time. And she was doing 3 by 3 addition. But I noticed every time she started from the hundreds, and then she did the tens, and then she did the ones. And there was a couple ones where, the numbers were okay. Let's say it was, the hundreds was a 6 and a 2, and the tens was a 2 and a 7, and the ones was a 3 and a 4, where, there was no carrying, there was no adding of any numbers, whatever. They were all 1-digit answers. And so I gave her a couple of those. And so then on the next one I wrote her, I gave her one where she was going to have to, trade a 10 for 100, or trade a 1 for a 10. And she started with the right. She started with the hundreds, and then she did the tens, and then she did the ones. So the middle number was the first one I gave her. The middle number was 11. But instead of taking the tens and moving it to, taking a group of tens and moving it to the hundreds, she left it. So the answer should have been 912, but the answer she wrote on her paper was 9,112 because she didn't carry the 1. She didn't carry the 100 over. So I kind of started asking her about that, and I said, so why don't you try going from right to left? So she kind of did, and she was able to do it. But then it was kind of interesting because then she gave me a problem, and she had 3 triangles on top, and she put plus, and she put 3 squares. She said, so what's the answer to that? So what I did is I just took each number and I moved them down. So I connected the square and the triangle, and I connected the square and the triangle. I did it 3 times, so that was my answer. And she goes, well, how did you get that? I says, well, isn't that what you do? I says, you add these together, right? So I added them together, but I just connected them. And I mean, it wasn't a right way to do math, but I was trying to see that, you add up and down, but if they're not the same number, if they're not numbered, if they're not something you can add, then you just kind of stack them there. And that's from my algebra days, when you're talking about exponents and, to the square problem and the x, whatever. But anyway, she was able. She couldn't follow that. So afterwards, I was kind of talking about it. I says, this is what you did. This is what we were doing. It was just interesting because she was able to tell me why she started from the hundreds and worked to the ones. She was able to tell me, when I had to go the other way, she was able to tell me why she did that. But she could not grasp because they weren't numbers; they were just shapes. She could not grasp how to add those shapes together. And like I said, there really is no way to do it. But I would just say, if they were numbers, this is how you would do it. It was just kind of interesting. I took it for what I saw what she was doing, and it made her kind of talk about what she was doing, how she was doing it, and why she was doing it. And it was kind of interesting. And then after that, she started. I would give her more symbol problems, and she was able to convert them. But anyway, like I said, you can have math discussions over anything. Like I said, the meeting was kind of getting boring, and the parents were kind of starting to get at each other, and so I thought, well, their parents are going to nitpick, so I'm going to, be productive with the student over here. So the next thing I wrote down are, what are the 4 meanings of fractions? What are the 4 meanings of fractions? Oh, we talked about that. That's the part whole, the measure, the quotient, and the ratio. Different ways that you can teach fractions. And then on page 280, they did a really good job of talking about the 3 types of fraction models. You will see the aerial model, which we kind of did when we were talking about the pattern blocks, when we were using the pattern blocks. They have circular pieces, they have square pieces, they have the pattern blocks. There's all different ways you can show fractions using the aerial model. There's also the length model, which is why we have the fraction cubes, is what we used in my class. And it tells you, you can see there in the Cuisinart rods, you have the orange is a 10, blue is 9, brown is 1/8. I mean, those are different fraction levels. The best way, like I said, I've seen it taught as a teacher just took a regular, like the sentence strips that you can get that you can buy already, and she started having the kids fold those, and they folded it in half, and then they labeled it, and then they folded those halves in halves, and they labeled that, and then they folded those in halves and labeled it, and then they would take out another one, and she would have them fold in thirds to make the thirds of the sixth. And it's just kind of interesting if the kids really, if you have your kids make their own, they can really grasp how they look. They to me, it seems like they grasp the concepts of fractions better if they see it first instead of if they just see it written on paper as a problem. Then you have the set model. It says the whole is a set of objects and the parts of the set or subsets are fractional parts. Since here 3 of the 9 cookies are chocolate, so the chocolate cookies represent one of the set. 5 of the 15 dots are red, so the 5 red dots also represent 1/3 of the set. The set model is more complicated than the other 2 models and should not be taught until children develop an understanding of the first 2 models. So students might have more trouble with that because they can't relate it to numbers. They're not numbers tied with it. They're having to create their own. Next thing I wrote down is what is meant by equal share. Yeah, what is meant by equal share? Equal division. No, Mark, we can't talk division because we're talking fractions. So say your answer without using the word division. Equal pieces. And again, that's where I would start because from kindergarten on up, the students are taught, you share equally, give equal size, whatever. Page 282 talks about sharing equally. It gives you 2 examples. The first one should be sharing 5 pies equally among 4 children. And so it shows you have, each pie is divided in half. So I wanted to show that the first pie is 1 and 2, the second pie is 3 and 4. Third pie is 1 and 2, the second pie is 3 and 4, and then you have 4 pieces left of another pie. And so you would count them 1, so that one person would get 1 whole pie and 1 piece over, so 1 and 1/4. How many 2s? You put the 2 2s together, now there's your 1 whole piece, and you have another 2 left over. The bottom one says sharing 5 pies equally among 3 children. So it's kind of the same concept. You take 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then what left over, you put that in the other pieces. I don't see the bottom part, the 3. I see that a lot with. I don't see that model taught a lot because it's still abstract at this point. That's still an abstract. They can't follow. I mean, the kids can easily do that. Put 1 in the first circle, second circle. I mean, they can see that, but they don't follow it as easy. That's a concept that I would bring out. Or I would teach it this way later on after I make sure that they can show me with fraction circles or with fraction towers how they're equal. Page 283 has another children's lit. And then 283 also has the word iterating on there. And I asked the question, what is iterating and how can it help students understand fractions? What is iterating? How can it help students understand fractions? Who wants to give it a shot? It's like decomposing fractions, yeah? Add in the fraction. There you go. Thanks, Alyssa. Adding the same over and over. Aaron, right, 1 6 plus 1 6 plus 1 6 until you get 6 6 1. look at it as re-explaining, but in different ways. Okay. The way I see iterating, the way that I've seen it used, and I'll be honest, I haven't seen it used for fractions as much on my schools. But what I see, where I see it as, the students see it as another way of doing multiplication. I can multiply it by doing repeated addition. That's kind of the same way I see iterating. But in this case, I can see if I have a strip that's 1/6 long, to use Aaron's example, and I take that same 1/6 and I put it over another thing and another thing and another thing. Now I'm adding 1/6 until I get to the whole, or until I get to 6/6. And then you can even go, once they're ready for it, you can take that 1/6 to show how, oh, now I have 7/6. How much is that as a mixed number? Okay, next question I have is, so what is the definition of an improper fraction or a mixed number? What makes an improper fraction, what makes a fraction improper, I should say? Okay, so a mixed number is a whole with a part, correct? What is an improper fraction? Okay, David, why is 26/5 an improper fraction?
Proper because, kind of just like Mark said, there's too many on top. You have too many holes above what it's actually supposed to be. So really, that should be 5 1/5 and not 26/5.
Now, and actually, you're correct. And an improper fraction is, when I taught math, it was pretty easy for the students to understand what an improper fraction was, because in everything they'd done up to that, they always knew that the top number had to be smaller or equal to the bottom number, but it couldn't be bigger. And then once we made that top number bigger, it's really easy to say that's an improper fraction, because the top number is bigger than the bottom number. So improper fraction is pretty easy to understand. And then a mixed number is just, once you have that improper fraction, how do I make it proper? How do I make it so that I know exactly what 25/6 is? 26/5 is. But then, so that's when we would, what's the process? So you divide the bottom number into the top number, and whatever is left over goes back over the bottom number. So yeah. Improper fractions, and it talks about different ways to teach it, how you teach it with an area model. And basically what they do is they start off with an extra pattern block. That's the one. And then from there you go above that. Okay, so the next question I have is, how would you teach equivalent fractions to your staff, to your students, excuse me? How would you teach equivalent fractions to your students? Pattern blocks? Thank you, great answer. How else would you teach equivalent fractions to your staff? Excuse me, to your students, I keep saying staff. That's cheating work. Hershey bars, perfect. Perfect. So Kieran, how is it going with number lines? Are your students understanding fractions on number lines? Super struggling. Why? Or in your perspective, why are they struggling with using number line? Someone help Kieran out. Why do you think they might be struggling with fractions on a number line? Thank you. Christina, perfect. It's not that it's too abstract. Christina hit it perfectly. Is up until fractions come along, we're taught that number lines are broken into whole numbers. I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to go to 10, and I'm going to go, each one of those lines is one whole piece. Now we're saying, okay, I'm taking the space from 0 and 1, and I'm going to divide that space into smaller pieces. And
a lot of teachers don't make that connection. They don't kind of, like what I would do is I would take, here's a number line from 0 to 10. But in between 0 and 10, I have a lot of, so in between 0 and 10, there's 10 pieces. There's my 1, there's 2, 3, 4, 5. But let's look at, now just look at from 0 to 1. That's a big space in there. Is there anything in between there? And I would have them break it down that way. Equivalent fractions is on a number line, I wouldn't use it on a number line. That would probably be the last way that I would teach it, because the students have to understand equal parts. And equal parts on a number line is hard to see unless you're using grid paper. It's really hard to see those increments. I had a friend when we were in math class in high school that he was, I don't know if ADD was a thing back then, or not ADD, OCD, or if he was just anal, but a lot of us, would write our number line, and we would just kind of eyeball where the next mark was, whether it was between where our number line was 0 to 20 or whatever. We would just kind of eyeball, oh, that looks about 5, that looks about 10, that looks about 15. That would drive him crazy. So he would, whatever it was, he had to use something to make that measurement. They had to be as equal as possible for him before he would move on. So that's one reason I would do number line toward the end, because I want to make sure that they can show me it either using fraction circles or using fraction tubes or fraction towers. However you make them do it, I would make sure they understand it that way before they would use number lines. And I kind of understand, you said you're only in there, you're not in there all the time to see. But kind of maybe next time that would be a good question to ask your proctor. Why are they struggling so much? Why do you think they're struggling so much with it? The other thing I liked that I wrote down on page 290 is in activity 11.10, find another name instruction. And I think that's cool because you have the same exact size of a shape, but based on where you draw your lines and how you connect those dots, you can turn, like at the top you have 1/3, you're turning 1/3 into 4/12. So the kids can see that the shape, the shaded area is exactly the same size. But based on how many pieces my total shape is broken into, there's my equivalent fraction. And at the bottom it shows 2/3 is equivalent to 8/12. Great way to show equivalent fractions. And it's a simple way, because you can buy the grid paper, easy. We provide it all the time for our teachers. So just a great way to show equivalent fractions without really any other type of manipulative except some dots on the paper. Exactly shows fraction multiplication as well. Yep, perfect. Okay, the next thing I wrote down is so the next thing I talked about fraction operations, and there was the first thing I saw that brought to mind. It said, "What 4 things must students know to understand a fraction operations?" And this is one of the reasons, or these are 4 reasons I think that students why they struggle with working with fractions. Can anybody find those four things for me from the reading?
Can you repeat the question one more time? It got choppy on my end.
Sorry. It said on at the beginning of the fraction operations, it talks about 4 things that students must know to understand fraction operations. And then from there I said, so these are really 4 things that the students don't have a good grasp of. They're going to struggle with fraction operations. So I asked if anybody knows what those 4 things are.
I got it.
Sure.
Is it
Go ahead.
understand whole number operation,
Yep.
the meaning of fraction, how to use fraction models, and how to find equivalent representations for fractions.
Okay. So if the students don't understand whole numbers to begin with, they're going to struggle with fractions. Because fractions are based on the whole. How many parts of the whole do you have? So if they don't understand whole numbers, they're going to struggle with that. If they don't know the meaning of a fraction, the fraction is just taking the whole piece and dividing it into smaller pieces. How many parts of that whole do I have? All those four things are the big things that cause students to understand or not understand or be able to do fraction operations easily. And so the next thing I have is addition and subtraction fractions. How would or should you start teaching addition and adding and subtracting fractions? So making sure you guys are doing the reading as well. How would or should you start teaching addition and subtraction of fractions? David.
I know for me personally, I would use manipulatives because that's what I just saw in my fourth grade classroom. The teacher was using, she wasn't, I guess she wasn't using manipulatives, but she was having to draw it out, kind of just like in this book we were drawing out different shapes and breaking it up to add and subtract them.
Right. So they're still using manipulatives because they're drawing as a manipulative. Yep, what else? Hint, guys, on page 293 it says, teaching tip. I would do what I said earlier. Perfect. Perfect. And so what the book talks about is, you know, at the top of page 293 it says, start with easier fractions that are familiar to children. Halves, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, eighths, tenths. I would really, with the younger, I would go halves, thirds, fourths. I wouldn't do anything above that, maybe sixths. Then it says start with fractions that have the same denominators, correct? And the other thing, I mean, the other questions that I always saw answered is, in a fraction, which is the numerator, which is the denominator? Kids aren't going to remember that. The way I was told it, and the way it always remembered me, is the denominator is the number that's down below the line. Denominator starts with D. D is down, so it was below the line. That's the only way I ever learned it. That's how I knew which one was the denominator. Thanks, Christina. You and I must have had the same teacher. So on page 294, it talks about adding and adding fractions with different denominators. Now, if you look at page 294 on figure 11.9, I've seen that some students understand that really easily. What it says is Becky drew two congruent, so the task is 3/4 plus 1/3. It says Becky drew two congruent rectangles, one to model 3/4 and the other to model 1/3. She found equivalent fractions with 12 as the common denominator. She subdivided each of the rectangles so that they now each had 12 parts. 3/4 plus 1/3 is the same as 9/12 plus 4/12. So what they did is they started at the top, and what I like is how they did one vertically and then they did one horizontally, so you could see the 3/4 and the 1/3. Excuse me a minute. And then they took those and they divided each one of those shapes into 12 total pieces. So now you can see that 3/4 is the same as 9/12. They didn't have to do anything but add those lines in. And they were able to see that 1/3 is the same as 4/12. So then they were able to add up all the pieces you have. So you have 9/12 and then you have 4 more 12. So when I put 3 to that first set, now I have one whole part. How many do I have left over? Some students can see that easily, and some students have trouble because they want their fractions to be the same way, and it's hard for them to see it. For me, it's easier to see it. They write one vertically and one horizontally to begin with, but a lot of students don't do that. They're used to writing them the same way. If they're using circles, they'll write the circles and they'll do them all the same way. And then at the bottom it says children's errors in subtracting mixed numbers. It says if you subtract 4 minus 2, then you are left with 1/4 minus 3/4, and you need to regroup, which causes difficulty since you have already subtracted the whole numbers. So it says a common regrouping error is to regroup 110 as 10 ones instead of regrouping one whole as 4 fours as illustrated here. Subtracting mixed numbers is, I just to be honest, it's horrible to teach. I hated teaching it because the students that don't understand place value and they don't understand, they don't have that number sense, they struggle because if you have trouble borrowing or regrouping with whole numbers, with fractions, it takes it to a whole new level because now you could be going from we started off with 1/4 and now you have 11/4 and the students are going, how did I get 11/4? Or they might have 1/4 and now that 1/4 becomes 13/4 and how do I get that? Whenever possible, use manipulatives to help because it's going to drive students crazy. The next thing I wrote down, we kind of already talked about. Multiplication of fractions is pretty easy. I mean, everybody can tell me the algorithm. You multiply the top together, multiply the bottom together, and you're done. But of course, we're doing this drug. Yeah. What I've seen my students really struggle with is just the whole concept of a fraction equals 1. Whether it's 4 fourths or 8 eighths or 12 twelfths, a lot of students don't see that that's one whole piece. I've seen it. I've seen it where the only way students believe it or understand it is when the teacher said, "Okay, divide the number by the top number," because that fraction line can also mean divide. And so once they divide it, then they see it. And I'm talking about if they're not using manipulatives. If they're using manipulatives, then they can move around and see 8 eighths. If I put them all together, I have one whole piece. Oh, so 8 eighths is the same as 1. But when you don't have manipulatives, it's hard to realize that 8 eighths. So they used to teach us what was called the magic 1. So whenever we had a fraction that had the same numerator and denominator, they told us to write the number 1 around it, in the shape that has the little beginning and the middle part of the bottom. That was their way of telling us, okay, remember that's always going to be 1. Multiplying a fraction by a fraction, if you look at 11.12, it's kind of the same thing. I like the candy bar one on the left. Candy had 3/4 of a candy bar. She ate 1/3 of it after lunch. What part of the candy bar did Cindy eat after lunch? And that one's kind of easy because the candy bar they have left is, if you break it up, you have 3 equal pieces. So now 1/4 of it is already gone. I have 3/4 left. If I eat 1/3 after lunch, I'm just eating one more piece, and now I have, how much did she eat after lunch? She ate 1/3. She ate 1/4 of the candy bar, however you want to word it. She ate one of the 3 pieces, but if you have 4 pieces total, she ate 1/4 of the pieces. The one B is a little bit more. Says Conan had 3/4 of a carton of eggs. So they wrote the 3/4. That's easy to see. He used 1/6 of the eggs to make cookies. Now this is confusing because they didn't do it like they did on 294, where they started with the 1 step first. They combined the steps already in the second part, and that's going to cause students to get confused. Because what they did on page 294, they broke that problem into 1, 2, 3 pieces. On this one, they went from the 1 piece on the top, and then they already broke it into the bottom piece. They missed that whole middle step. And some students can't grasp that without seeing those step by step. So you got to make sure that however you're explaining it to the students, they're understanding it, they can see it, they can recreate it. Page 296 says in the classroom division of fractions. Something to read through. It's pretty good. It gives you the algorithm for multiplication of fractions. It gives you multiplication of mixed numbers and improper fractions. I'm sure you guys heard when it comes to mixed numbers, we called it the backward C. The way you change a mixed number to a improper fraction, we called it the backward C because if you remember the steps, you take the denominator, you multiply it by the whole number, and then you add the numerator to it. So let's say my fraction, my mixed number is 4 2/5. Okay, so now I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to write a C backwards. So 5 times 4 is 20, plus 2 is 22. So 4 2/5 becomes 22/5 as an improper fraction. And like I was taught, maybe you guys were taught too, but We called it the backward C. That's how we knew. And at the bottom of the C is your multiplication, and the top of the C is your addition. Again, if I would have had manipulatives to see how to do that, how to actually see, okay, here's 4 2/5 of whatever. If I break it into how many individual pieces of the whole, oh, I see how 4 2/5 becomes 22/5. We didn't have that, so ours was all algorithm. Anything on fractions? That completes chapter 11. Like I said, these three chapters that we're doing today are real easy. They fit together because fraction moves into decimals. So the first question I asked on decimals is, why are decimals so hard to teach? I've drawn out 4 2/5 in pizza form and in them at all the pieces, multiple pieces, and fractional pizza and it. So when I do that, show that. Yeah, you're right on, Aaron. If they don't understand place value, they will struggle with fractions. And I can tell you guys, when we get our AZ merit names back, we find that number sense is one of the things that, K through 12. That's one of the things that the students struggle big time. Christina, why are decimals evil? Okay. So the best way for me to do decimals, the way I taught it to my students, I think the biggest reason students struggle with it is because decimals has to deal with place value. But we start off teaching place value to the left of the decimal. As a matter of fact, when we first teach place value, we don't have a decimal there. We start with the ones, the tens, and the hundreds. We don't put a decimal and say, okay, to the right, to the left of the decimal, our first base is 1. We just say, when we're talking place values, you have ones, tens, and hundreds. And so when we start talking about decimals, now we're talking about numbers to the right of the decimal. And so a lot of teachers will say, so whatever you have on the left, you turn it to the right. No, because we don't have a 1th in decimals. The first decimal we have is 1/10. And then the next one is 1/100th. And then the next one is 1/1000th. So I've already changed the rules of the students, because logically, if I have ones place to the left of the decimal, the first place to the right of the decimal should be a 1th place, but we don't do that. And I think that's the first main thing that causes students to not understand decimals, is because they want to associate it with the ones place. Okay. The other thing that I hate is when students read whole numbers. Like if the number is 112, they say 112. No, because 112, if I write it out, it's 100.12. Because we are also taught that whenever you say the word "and" as you're reading a number, "and" is a decimal. So there's a difference between 112 and there's a difference between 112. 112 is $100.12. 112 is $112. I would rather have $112 than $100.12. So again, make sure the students understand that the decimal can also be an and point. And once you say the and point, now we're not talking whole numbers. We're talking smaller amounts. So it says, what do students need to be able to do to understand decimals? Students to understand decimals, what do they need to do? Practicing my wait time, guys. Just, and I don't have 6 to call on. Money cents. Draw pictures. what else? Let's back it up with an easier question. Is 4 1/2 the same as 4.5? Now stop before you answer it. Don't answer it from a college student in an NEU class sitting here on a Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. Answer it as a third grade student who's learning fractions, who sees 4 1/2 and then sees the number 4.5. Are they the same? Would you say they're the same as a third grader? What's your thinking? Mark?
Actually, just ran into that last week. My practicum instructor was getting really annoyed with students that were doing 4.5 instead of saying 4 5/10 or 4 1/2. And she kept telling them, if you're doing 4.5, you're not telling me what the quantity is of something. If you tell me it's 4 5/10, and I know that it's a 4 whole number and it's 5/10 of a whole number, or if you're telling me it's 4 1/2, you're telling me it's 4 1/2 of another to make 5. So I kind of got a kick out of that because students see it as a 4.5 or 4.56. I mean, even we talk that way today. I got a 3.78, not a 3 7/800 grade point average. I mean, it's
Right.
So I kind of get a kick out of that you hit on that one.
Yeah. Because the other part of it is 4 1/2 and 4.5 are exactly the same amount. But what the students don't see is 4.5, I can also write that as, like you said, as 4 5/10. But if I don't know how to reduce fractions, then, because now I have 4.5, which if I read it out in words, it's 4 5/10. 5/10 is a fraction. They can both be divided by 5. Now I have 1/2. So thank you, Christina. 4 1/2 is the reduced form of 4.5. But the students don't see it as a reduced form. They have to go through the thinking process that I just gave you, where 4.5, I'm going to write it out, so that's 4 5/10. Now I'm going to reduce 5/10. 5/10 reduces to 1/2. So 4 1/2 and 4.5 is the same exact number, but I just wrote it differently. See, Christina, I just made a connection. You just had an aha moment. Perfect. We can go home now. And I read the next note I wrote, we already talked about it, says, the thing is, they're talking about, the next thing it talks about is extending place value. And for some students, if they don't understand place value to begin with, to ask them to extend place value is not going to make any sense to them. Again, they'll know how to do it to the left, and it takes a while for them to realize, okay, if I'm at 1,000, then to the right of the decimal, I'm going to have a place called the thousandth. If I have 10,000ths place, I'm going to have a 10,000ths with a TH place to the right. If I have a millions place, I'm going to have a millionths place. And so eventually they'll see that and they get rid of that. They realize there's no ones and they start with the tens. So when I started teaching decimals, I started basing everything on 100. And then from there, I had to teach kids how you reduce down. And basically what I said is if it ends in an even number, if your numerator has an even number at the end and your denominator has an even number at the end, then at least they can be divided by 2. So that's where you start. You divide by 2. So if you have 7800ths, to use the fraction, one of the things that Mark said, for 7800ths, I have 2 even numbers, so I can at least divide by 2. So now I have 78 divided by 2. That's 36. No, that's not 36. That's 39. And 39, and then 100 divided by 2 is 50. So now I'm at 39/50. They're not even. Okay, now I'm done. I reduce it. So that's another thing that students have to be able to understand how to reduce, which is another different concept to go on. Bottom page 305, it talks about using a 10 by 10 grid. It says there are many excellent models for base 10 fractions. Most of these models will already be familiar to students. You have a 10 by 10 grid, and you start from there. meter stick that talks about the little millimeters and centimeters, and then of course you have the number line. And so they're teaching number line when they're converting fractions to decimals. And one of the things that we learned in the previous chapter is using number lines to teach as you're teaching fractions. Page 12.1 is kind of a who am I activity. The last time we did meet, I gave you guys that decimal draw sheet where you had to cut out the little decimals on this side, and then it had the little mini 100 sheets where you colored them in. That's a great activity, and that's just a really easy way to check to see if students, one, understand place value, two, if they understand the difference between filling out a tenth, which is a whole row, or filling out a hundredth, which is one of the little squares in the box. It's a good way to see if they really understand decimal place value or not. And again, on page 307, it kind of shows the same thing. Partition a square into 10 equal columns, stage 4 of them, ask students to identify the fractions. So I have 10 equal columns, and 4 of them are colored in. Now I have 4 tenths. Then 2 says partition a square with 10 equal columns and 10 equal rows. So the square has 100 equal parts, shape 4 columns and 7 small squares. Now the 4 columns, I don't have 4 tenths. Now I have 40 hundredths. And then now I add the 7. Now I have 47 hundredths. And so it's just a way for the students to see. And then the bottom one is displayed at 0.47 read as 47 hundredths is another symbol for the fractional amount that both the fraction 47 100ths and 47 hundredths express the same quantity. One of the questions that I used to ask when I taught this, and I'm going to go into it now even though it's in the next section, is the question that I asked on the test was, how is a ratio, a proportion, and a percent, how is a ratio, proportion, percent, and fraction the same? Can anybody answer that? They can't be what? A ratio, a proportion, a fraction, and percent can be what? Think about it, Christina. Decimal. That's one of them. Thank you, Alyssa. Perfect. They can all show the same value. And some students, it takes them a long time to realize that 47 over 100 is the same as 0.47, which is the same as, so 47 hundredths is a fraction, 0.47 is a decimal, and 47 out of 100, or 47 parentheses 100, they're all the same. Proportion, I'll throw the word proportion out. The way I asked the question was, what do a ratio, a percent, and a decimal all show? A fraction, a decimal, and a percent. That was the question. What do a fraction, decimal, and percent represent? They can all represent the same number. And again, it took a while for the students to see that. It talks about extending the place value on the bottom of page 307. They're talking about a whole number. So 3,245 equals 3 times 1,000 plus 2 times 100 plus 4 times 10 plus 5. They want you to do that same thing with decimals. So at the top of page 308 it says 23 and 7,600 is 2 times 10 plus 3 times 1 plus 7 times 1/10 plus 6 times 100. That is a method that I think if more of our teachers showed when they're talking about fractions, wrote it in extended form so the students could see that, I think it would make more sense to the students. But in my experience, my teachers do very little with expanded form when it comes to fractions. They do it a lot with whole numbers, but they don't do it as much as I think they should. And I think it would make a big difference if they did it with decimals, but they don't. And again, on page 308, and it's a simple, mean, I remember doing it. I remember when I was little growing up and we had to write things in expanded form. And I remember the first time we did it as a class, I think the number that's sticking in my head for whatever reason was 1,245. And we had to write it in expanded form. And that was the first lesson that he did. So that was the introduction. He wrote the number on the board and he said, write this in expanded form. And so what we all did is we had no idea what he was talking about. So we put as much space between each number as we could. And we told him we wrote in expanded form. And he goes, no, you just stretched out the space in between these letters. Well, yeah, but we expanded the form out. And so it was a good way for him to see that none of us had a clue what expanded form was. So from then, that's how he took us into that lesson. On page 308, it talks about the role of the decimal point. And basically that role is to tell you that to the left of the decimal is numbers greater than or equal to 1, and to the right of the decimal is numbers less than 1. And again, it gives some other examples of base 10 blocks, base 10 blocks and activities that you can do. Decimal number sense, it says an understanding and intuition about the size and value of decimals. And it talks about familiar fractions and decimals, your fourths, your halves, your thirds, your big numbers. What I didn't like about the cubes that we had when I taught the manipulative classes, it gave you everything. Some of the kids had halves, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, eighths, ninths. A lot of those that you won't use. I don't think I've ever seen something measured out to the ninth or to the seventh. Normally you see the halves, the thirds, the fourths, the fifths, the sixths, the eighths, the tenths, the twelfths, but you don't see a lot of those. So again, it talks about converting familiar fractions to decimals. Again, that's that same decimal draw activity that I gave you guys. It shows at the top of page 310. Talking about ordering decimals. And figure 3 at the top of page 311, it says student work on thousandths involved ordering 6 decimal numbers. So they had, the fractions they were given was 5 thousandths, 5 hundredths, that third one looks like 62 thousandths, 495 thousandths, and then 5 tenths. And they had to order them from smallest to largest. So they're showing 5 thousandths. They only have one of those little squares colored in. That doesn't show 5 thousandths. The 500ths doesn't show. Well, the 500ths is right. That's showing 500ths on that number 2. 52 thousandths. That's not showing. So, I mean, that's a student who kind of understood part of it, but he didn't understand the whole thing. Either that or they gave him grid paper that wouldn't help him understand it. So I mean, he's kind of got on the right path, but he is struggling pretty big time unless they're using different colors to represent. Now that might be what they're doing. They might be doing the different colors. So the green or the dark color would represent 1,000ths. The yellow would be the hundredths. And the orange would be the tenths. I think that's what they did. But without having, now that I've looked at it, I think that's what they did. But again, that would be something that you as a teacher would have to set up for the students ahead of time. Decimal operations, adding and subtracting decimals using the 10 by 10 grid. Adding and subtracting is pretty easy. Multiplying gets a little bit more difficult because you're breaking them into a lot smaller numbers. That's the other thing I forgot to mention when we were talking about addition and subtraction of fractions at the beginning. A lot of people have trouble understanding because they realize that if I have 6 pieces, or if I have 8 pieces, 8 is bigger than 6. So I want 8 pieces of the pie instead of 6 pieces of the pie. But the other side of that is when it comes to denominators, they think that the bigger number is more. So if I'm talking fractions, I want 1/6 of a pie. I don't want 1/8 of a pie because 1/8 of the pie is smaller. Do you get more pieces, but it's smaller. And so the kids have trouble converting that because on one side of the thing, the bigger the number, the more I get, the bigger the piece. On the right side, the bigger the number, the smaller the piece. And students have trouble making that conversion. Right. It's perception. And don't even ask me how to explain to you how to do decimals on an abacus, because I could not tell you. But then it talks about multiplication and division of decimals. Again, it doesn't teach it using manipulatives. It's kind of taking it, if you look at the bottom page 313, you have 1 and 8/10 times 3 and 4/10. Well, 1 and 8/10 is the same as 18/10. 3 and 4/10 is the same as 34/10. And then once they change it there, they're just going to use the formula. Lesson, page 314, the lesson of multiplying and dividing decimals. It says, my assignment is to write a letter to a 4th grade explaining how to multiply decimals without a calculator. I found a really neat way to do this, and then that's the lesson that it explains how to do it. I would take a chance when you get a chance to read through that. It's kind of interesting the way that they explain it. And we are done with the chapter on decimals. Any questions on decimals? Whoever said it's evil, do you still feel decimals are evil? Yes, no? Yep. Evil-ish, maybe we're getting rid of the horns, maybe. The next chapter talks about ratio, proportion, and percent. To me, again, these are the same concept. Go ahead, Mark.
So would you say then it's never a good idea to put the cart in front of the horse and teach decimals before fractions? Would it be easier for them to understand decimals and then teach fractions, or?
I wouldn't say teach decimals before fractions, because they still got to understand that even when you're talking about decimals, you're still talking about part of a whole. You may be talking about 8/10, but you're still talking about 8 parts of that whole 10th piece.
But wouldn't it? I mean, because it kind of falls in with kind of a number sense thing, like you were saying before, right? Because we're not teaching them that there's even a decimal there when we're teaching whole numbers initially. And so
here's how I would answer that question. Before I even teach decimal and fractions, I would make sure that when I'm teaching place value, I am teaching both sides of place value. I'm teaching place value on both sides of the decimal point. And so I guess in a way,
that's what I was getting to, yeah.
With place value. And they've got to, like I said, usually place value, we start teaching place value, we talk about the tens, the ones, and the hundreds. And we don't even talk about place value to the right of the decimal until we get either to money or until fractions. And so I think if they were taught, if place value to the right and left of the decimal were taught at the same time, I think the whole fractions and decimal things would come a lot easier to students.
That's what I was keying in on, because to me, to teach decimals and to teach fractions, if they don't understand the right side of the of the number place, they're not going to. I mean, it's going to be the same confusion that I had when I was that age, because you're going to be like, now wait a minute here. I know about the ones, the tens, the hundreds, all the way up to the millions, because we didn't do gazillions like they do now. But what's this to the right crap? I mean, So in my opinion, I agree with you that it would be so much smarter if we taught both sides of the decimal, or both sides of the number values, and then taught the fractions and then the decimals, because then you can give them those aha moments. Remember when I said 1 and 5/10? Bam! You know what 5/10 is? That's a fraction, baby. There it is. And so I don't know. To me, it would be a better aha moment for me, but I don't know.
Right. But again, I think that would make things a lot easier, because if you think about it, even when so the way the standards have it right now, money is taught in 2nd grade. But even when they start teaching money, they don't teach it in terms of place value. They start teaching them, here's a penny, here's a nickel, here's a dime, here's this, and they teach it up to this much. Once I put all this together, then eventually I get to $1. but they never see that decimal point until they get to $1. Like Christina said, I have to think of decimals like money. I want a penny to be in that 10 spot because I want it to be a 1 spot. But I have to remember the dime is a tenth of 100 cents, and a penny is 1 out of 100 cents, so that 1 goes in the hundreds place, and then after that, she's not teaching it past 3rd grade. But I see her rationale, but that's what I'm saying is that they would start, when they start money, saying money, if 1 penny, here's 1 penny, but if I'm talking about place value, here's where that 1 penny goes. And then you can see, then it would be easy to show, okay, so here's 1 penny is actually 0.01. 2 pennies is 0.02. And then you can start with the whole regrouping, because now once I get 10 hundredths becomes 1/10. And the students know how to do that because they know how to take, now I have 10 individual stickers, or how do they do it? I have 10 individual units. Now I'm going to take those 10 individual units and I'm going to trade them in for 1 rod on the base 10. And then when I get 10 of those rods, I'm going to change those 10 rods in for 1 flat. But they don't, again, the whole concept of place value isn't taught to write a decimal. And even when we start teaching money, we still don't really talk about place value. We talk about $1 is 1.00 because it's 100 pennies. And then that's when they try and say, well, what is a decimal place? You know, the students don't relate the decimal place in a dollar to being 1 and no hundreds. You know, so I think if they were tight.
I hate it when this thing does this.
Chocolate candies to the total number of candies in the bowl, an example of a bar to whole ratio. So I have 10 blue candies, but I have 15 red candies. Part to part ratio is the comparison of the number of girls to the number of boys on a sports team. It's all one team, but I have 1 part is boys, 1 part is girls. So that's my part ratio. And then ratios with 2 different measures is ratio 65 miles per hour is a comparison of 2 different kinds of units, miles and hours. Just a quick question, quick comment on that, quick story. I never understood the concept that 60 miles per hour meant in 1 hour you should travel 60 miles if you're driving 60 miles per hour. I never knew that. And one of the years we went on vacation, we were going to California, we went to Disneyland, my dad took us. And so every time he saw a sign that said, you know, like from Morenci to Phoenix is what, 174 miles or something like that. So he would say, if I have 174 miles to go and I'm driving 60 miles an hour, how long is it going to take me to go 174 miles? But usually, I mean, so he would start less. So, you know, if there's 20 miles between here and here and I'm driving 60 miles an hour, how long should it take me to get there? You know, then you work backwards. But it took me forever to realize that that's exactly what 60 miles per hour means. It means I should cover 60 miles in 1 hour. So in 2 hours, I should cover 120 miles. It took a long time for me to understand that. So now, that's kind of what I base it on, because now it's harder. I mean, on the freeway now, the speed limit is 75. Okay, so if I'm driving 75 miles an hour and it takes me 90 miles from Wilcox to Tucson, if I'm driving 75 miles an hour, I'm going to travel 75 miles in 1 hour. Now I have 15 more miles to go. It should take me maybe an hour and 7 minutes. I mean, it's just kind of that whole thing. But like I said, it took me forever to do ratios with 2 different measures. It took me a long time to really understand. That's what 60 miles per hour means. That's what $8 per hour means. Oh, every hour I'm going to earn $8. Okay, well, actually, no, it's now minimum wages $11. So every hour I'm going to earn $11. Says children have difficulty understanding ratios because they have difficulty distinguishing situations that require additive reasoning from situations that require multiplicative reasoning. Provide children with many opportunities to learn the difference between additive and multiplicative. So again, it says how many red? That's an example of part O, because we have marbles. They're all marbles, but what part are red and what part are blue. Activity 13.2 says, where are the ratios? Provide children with several solutions and for each situation and ask, is that a ratio? What is the ratio? And then it gives some examples of that. And then it gives examples of displaying ratios. It says, we're going to make some punch. Here are some recipes. I found 4 different quantities of punch. So you would ask, what is the ratio for the number of cups of cranberry juice to water, and the recipe makes 5 cups of punch. And it just gives different ways for them to see it.
Stupid thing. Why all of a sudden it started doing that?
Is a rectangle whose length and width are in the golden ratio. Golden ratio appears in many areas of math, including the Fibonacci sequence. See chapter 1. The standards for the lesson are from Principles and Standards for School Math and the Common Core Standards. I don't even know why they brought that in there. You're never going to have to worry about the Fibonacci sequence. So, I mean, it's an interesting read, but you're not going to have to worry about it. Proportions. So, proportions go along with ratios. It says they're an expression of equality between two ratios. Let me see. Ooh, now we're talking about the slope. The slope of a line. How many of you like to find the slope of a line when you were in algebra? Who can remember the formula to find the slope? Rise over run. But what was the formula? How did you find the slope of a line? Oh, there you go, Michaela. Y equals mx plus b, which means what? Don't ask me. Now, how could you teach slope using manipulatives without that formula? Maybe, but it would be pretty difficult to do. Talks about equivalent ratios on page 329. And basically equivalent ratios are the same as equivalent fractions, equivalent decimals. Activity 13.5, it says, which are the same. Prepare four pictures showing adults and luggage to display. Say, many airlines have a limit on how many pieces of luggage you can carry onto the plane. Take these 4 pictures of people getting ready to board a plane. Which of the pictures represents the same ratio of adults to luggage? It talks about ratio tables. Ratio tables I do see a lot. I've seen a lot in the classes as I'm walking through, especially in my 5th and 6th grade. I think it helps to a point. Now at the bottom of page 229, at the bottom of page 13.6, I've seen this taught as I was talking to you guys about. There was a thing in the other book that talks about extending patterns vertically and horizontally. So it basically, the first one you have 3 to 1. So if you double that, now you have 62. If you triple that, you have 9 to 3. If you quadruple that, you have 12 to 4. Some students can get that, seeing it in the drawing. Some people have to use the table right above it to see that. It just depends on how the students learn, how they take in information. Page 330 talks about informal reasoning. It says students should have many opportunities to use informal reasoning to solve proportion problems before learning algorithms. This kind of reasoning encourages flexible thinking and deepens students' understanding. Consider the following problem. Alex bought 50 blank CDs for $14.50. At the same price, how much would 60 CDs cost? So to solve this problem, you might ask, at this rate, how much does one CD cost? Find the answer, use the calculator, divide 1450 by 50. The answer is 29 cents. Then to find the piece, the price of 60 CDs multiplied 29 cents times 60. Okay, that's great if you know all that stuff. Finding unit rate provides an efficient solution. This is a powerful strategy for students to learn because unit rates are used in both science and mathematics. So again, I would do this after I know that students really understand what ratios are and how you get ratios and how they can be represented. Talks about cross multiplication, which we all did. We know that's how you multiply fractions. Well, it's also how you multiply ratios. Page 331, it talks about a linear function as a function whose graph is a straight line. So with proportions, you start getting into a little bit of graphing. Graphing proportional relationships. So it says the number of dollars, the number of quarters. You know, $1 is 4 quarters, $2 is 8 quarters, $3 is 12 quarters. And so they kind of graph that to show on a linear equation what that would look like. Geometry and measurement talks about scale drawing and drawing those two proportions. I think there was only one time that I ever really did a lesson or was taught a lesson on drawing things to scale and making sure the proportion was right. And I think it was an assignment that I had my junior class in math. After that, I mean, now students have the graphic calendars, they have all that other stuff. Understanding percents. Percents is basically fractions that are based on 100. The decimals based on 100. Again, it talks a lot about the 10 by 10 grids, using calculators to find percents, how you solve percent problems. I'll be honest, on 336, you have on the right column it says find 20% of 80. 20 is what percent of 80? 80 is 20% of what number? When I hear that, the thing that sticks in my mind is of means times. Of always meant times when I was taught it. So to find 20% of 80, I'm going to do 0.2 times 80. 20 is what percent of 80? 20 is what percent? 20x times 80. Then you divide, you get, I mean, that's the whole thing. But when I see percents, that's reminds me of means time, and you go from there. Anything else in here big? I mean, page 337 is kind of showing that same thing. It says find 20% of 80, so there's several ways you can do it. It says draw a rectangle that represents the whole for 80, because 20% is 1/5, subdivide this rectangle into 5 equal parts. Each part is 1/5 of 80, or 16, then 20% of 80 is 16. So there you did it without having to do the multiplication. You had to do a little bit of it. Not really. If you know that 20%, again, 20% is how many 20s does it take to get to 100? Oh, that's 5. So each one of those 20, make it into 5, 20%. I mean, there's different ways to think about it. This is just showing you 3 different ways that you can solve those problems on page 336. 337 tells you how to do that. Okay, and I'm going to stop there because algebraic reasoning is the next one. And algebraic reasoning kind of goes better with them in geometry, measurement, and data analysis and probability. So, next week we'll hit those 4 chapters. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. I'll think about it between now and then. It depends on what I see as I'm looking through it. But you will, I mean, hopefully you guys realize that without it being called algebra, our kindergarten students are using algebra and they don't know it because they'll have problems that say 2 plus, and then you have the teacher will actually draw a square, and then they'll have equals 7, and the students have to figure out what goes in that box. Well, that box is the same as saying 2 plus x equals 7. But again, we don't tell the students that's algebra until way later in the process. So anyway, like I said, next week we will cover the last 4 chapters. I'm just kind of flipping through them right now. Some of the stuff we'll talk about kind of in detail. Some of it we won't, because I noticed it's talking about transformation, tessellations, all that other stuff. I see that very little in my classes right now. Let's see. Measurement. I mean, measurement's one of the easiest things we can do. Talks about customary, and so yeah. Even though there's 4 chapters next week, it's not going to take us a lot of time to go through them, which will actually give you more time to work on the summative lesson. So what you have due Sunday night, what's due next Monday is the week-long lesson that has basically 5 hours of math taught, an hour taught Monday, an hour taught Tuesday, hour taught Wednesday, hour taught Thursday, hour taught Friday. You have the standard that you're covering, and then each one of those you're going to have a whole group lesson, and then some type of group or independent lesson, and I want to see some math activities, math games, math centers, whatever, however you're going to fill up that hour math block that you have to teach math every day, Monday through Friday, except Monday you probably won't have an assessment because you're just introducing the lesson. You might have an assessment on Friday because you got to make sure you know what the students learned or didn't learn based on that lesson. And then the following Monday, which would be the 11th, actually on the 10th is when your signature assignment is due, which is the reflection, all that other stuff. That's due on the 10th. I will grade it on the 11th, and I will turn your grade in on the 12th. So any questions, comments, suggestions? Go ahead, Lydia.
I was looking at the signature assignment and the 5 lesson plans that we have to cover. What is the initial plan? Because I couldn't find.
The very first lesson plan that I had to write.
So is it in week 1? Is it the week 1 lesson plan?
It was due week. Yeah, it was assigned week 1. It was due the first time in week 2.
Okay, so
I think
that was
it
the
was
one.
really similar to the one we did in the evaluation class that had the standard, the lesson, the standard, the objective, the activities, and the evaluation. That was the very
That
first.
was a full week including. It was a full week including reading, science.
That was the integrated lesson. So the very first lesson. Let me go back to the syllabus.
Because it was for the week 1 lesson plan. It says it was the one for the non-math sections of the lesson plan: reading, writing, science, and social studies, etc. Only write what you would teach. So we did a full week.
Okay, if you go to the syllabus, on page 4, it says creating a positive, in bold it says creating a positive and productive classroom community assignment. And then it says some ideas for activities related to this learning target include the following. And it said create a plan to begin the first week of school, including math instruction, which would focus on promoting a growth mindset in math and help students rethink what it means to be smart or good at math. That was the first one that you guys did that was due on January 22nd.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the one that included the other one, that was the integrated lesson that's on page 5. It says integrated lesson. Teacher candidates design a lesson in which they integrate other subjects such as literacy, science, or art along with math. So that's the kind of one I told that you would kind of do like a thematic unit, yeah. So they're 2 different lessons. The first one.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I know that. Yeah, I was just making sure I was on the right one because I know for the one you had us do in week 1, we still had to include reading, writing, but we didn't have to go in depth.
Right.
It was a full week.
And so, this one, if you want for this one, that could be one that if you wanted to take out all that other stuff and just focus on that math part of that very first one, you could, or you could just transfer what you have and do a reflection on that.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No problem. Any other questions? Okay, so if not, I will see you guys all next Tuesday. Oh, Mark, I knew Mark would come up with something.
Well, I'm just going to clarify, we have no final then. Our final is the signature assignment.
Your final is the signature assignment. Yep.
Okay.
The final is the reflection and all that. And so just one more thing, just to make sure we're on the same page. So the in-task reflections, you should have one that deals. So you should have an in-task reflection of that first initial plan, which is the one that Dana and I just talked about. You should have one for the differentiation lesson. You should have one for the number talk. You should have one for the integrated lesson, and the one for the week-long lesson that is due this coming Monday. So on those 5 things there, that's what you're going to pick one of those in-task standards, and you're going to reflect on that thing. So again, except for the integrated lesson, the other 4, they're already done. You've already done those and turned those in. You just copy those and paste them into that one Word document that is going to have your whole signature assignment, all that stuff included. Go ahead, Mark.
And like you said, the end tasks are less than a 1-pager type of deal. It's just to kind of go through what standard we picked, what we felt we got from that, what we're going to use it in, and little fluff and done.
Yeah, you don't even have to add the fluff, because what the end task says is, after writing and possibly teaching each lesson or activity, teacher candidates will complete a reflection based on the standard you choose. The reflection will contain a description and analysis of the project, which you don't have to do that because you're doing the reflection below that. So that's going to be your description and analysis. So you're just doing a reflection on the elements of the lesson with insights for teaching that in the future. Does that make sense? So the description analysis, you don't have to do that because that's the lesson that you already did. You're just doing a reflection on the standard that goes with that and why you chose that standard, and then how you were going to teach, or how insights for teaching using that in the future.
Okay.
Any other questions or
No,
comments?
I get it. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? All right. So got you out before 9 o'clock. Perfect. Questions or comments? If not, I'll see you guys later. Have a good night.